Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Roni Reuter. On the morning of Thursday, October 4, 2007, neighbors of Roni heard heart-wrenching screams and loud bangs coming from her apartment. Alarmed, they called 911 and requested authorities to investigate. The police arrived immediately, and when no one came to open the door, they forced their way inside. In the kitchen, they found a woman lying face down, wearing body armor, with wounds to her head, arms, and pregnant belly. It appeared she had tried to shield her unborn child by covering her stomach with her hands, causing both her hands and stomach to be injured. There were 2 wounds to her abdomen, indicating that the baby was the main target of the attack. The attacker then inflicted injuries to the back of her head. Tragically, both she and her unborn child were dead. The brutality of the crime left the police deeply shaken, questioning who could commit such a horrific act against a pregnant woman. A forensic investigation uncovered a spent 9mm cartridge case and 5 unused cartridges near the body. There were no signs of forced entry, robbery, or sexual assault, ruling out a random attack or burglary. This led investigators to believe the murder was personal and premeditated. It seems that Roni has a dangerous enemy who has harmed her. Police theorize that the attacker attacked Roni as she was preparing to leave the apartment to go to work, ambushing her when she opened the door. Detectives interviewed her neighbors, hoping to find witnesses or valuable leads. The neighbors reported hearing sounds resembling gunshots, leading authorities to suspect the killer used a silenced weapon. A neighbor reported seeing a skinny African-American teenager wearing a hooded sweatshirt, walking up the stairs to Roni's door at around 7:00 a.m., shortly before the incident. Later, another neighbor saw this person running out of the house, get into a small black car, and drive away from the parking lot. Police reviewed surveillance footage from cameras near the house. The footage captured a black car, likely a Volkswagen, arriving at 7:04 a.m. and leaving at 7:55 a.m., aligning with the time frame of the murder. However, the driver of the car has not yet been identified. Inside Roni's purse, investigators discovered a mysterious letter. The letter referenced Sean, the father of her unborn child, and claimed to have uncovered details about him. It alleged that Sean had romantic relationships with women from various countries, listing the names and phone numbers of 16 women he had affairs with. The letter also mentioned Roni's pregnancy, stating that Sean did not want the baby. Detectives suspected the murder was linked to Roni's pregnancy and believed Sean might have crucial information. The teenager seen near the house became the primary suspect, and both he and the black car were placed on a wanted list. Meanwhile, investigators began looking into Roni's social relationship to determine if she had any enemies. She was born in the small town of Potosa, Wisconsin. She met Sean at a charity event in Wisconsin, and the two quickly fell in love. After completing college, she moved to Deerfield, Illinois, a wealthy Chicago suburb with a population of 20,000. At the time of the murder, Roni was 42 years old, lived alone in her condominium. She was 7 months pregnant, eagerly preparing for the arrival of her first child, a baby girl she planned to name Skylar. The father of her child was Sean, 45, her partner of 17 years. Despite dating for many years, they did not marry or live together. Sean, a former Chicago Bears football player, was questioned by detectives for 10 hours. He shared how much he loved Roni and was looking forward to their child's birth. Roni deeply loved him, but Sean's feelings were more complex. He admitted to detectives that he had multiple affairs, which strained their relationship. He said that Roni knew about his infidelity, and it had caused her to grow distant from him. Despite this, he insisted he was excited to become a father. He appeared heartbroken over the tragic deaths of Roni and their unborn baby, and his emotions seemed genuine. Additionally, his strong, athletic build did not match the description of the thin teenager a neighbor claimed to have seen. Sean told the police that he had overslept that morning, he waking up at 9:15 a.m. and then went to a barbershop for a haircut. This alibi was confirmed by the barbershop administrator. However, the barbershop was close to Roni's house, just a 10-minute walk from her home, which made the detectives suspicious. They considered the possibility that Sean might have killed Roni or orchestrated the crime by hiring someone else. Despite his alibi, investigators did not eliminate him as a suspect and continued looking into his potential involvement. They questioned Sean's friends to evaluate whether he was capable of murder, his relationship with Roni, and whether he truly wanted the child. Sean's close friends have strenuously denied that he committed the crime, insisting that he was delighted to be a father, despite his relationships with other women. When detectives visited Sean's home for a follow-up interview, they discovered parenting books and baby items, indicating that he was preparing for fatherhood. During the interview, police asked who he thought might be responsible for the crime. He listed 16 women he had recently been involved with, and emphasized one name in particular, Monika Kurowska. Sean said that Monika, a fitness model from Poland, was someone he had dated while living in Europe. Their relationship ended a year ago, but Monika couldn't accept the breakup and began stalking him. She traveled to the United States and started following him. One night, she came to his apartment complex, ringing all the doors, including those of his neighbors and his own. When he stepped outside, he discovered a broken window and noticed Monika had blood on her hand. He found her behavior very worrying and dangerous, so he took out a restraining order against her. Sean suspects that Monika is the one who sent letters to Roni and his other lovers. These letters caused conflict between him and Roni. He suspects Monika because she follows him and knows all his secrets. In addition, the letters contain common errors in people who are just learning to speak English, like Monika. Even his mother received such a letter. Detectives became interested in Monika and eventually located her. During questioning, Monika denied any involvement in Roni's death, claiming she had an alibi. She was at work on the morning of the murder. The police confirmed her alibi. Monika shared a slightly different account of events. She admitted traveling to the USA to see Sean, hoping to win him back. Upon arriving at his home, she discovered him with another woman. In a fit of anger, she knocked hard on the window and accidentally broke it. Following this incident, she ended her relationship with Sean and claimed it was the last time she saw him. She also denied sending letters to Roni or Sean's mother, but the police remained skeptical of her story and continued to view her as a suspect. Despite their efforts, the investigation stalled. They suspect both Sean and Monika, as each had a motive to harm Roni, but both had alibis. No other suspects emerged. Then, the case took an unexpected turn. Police continued to question all of Roni and Sean's relatives. During the investigation, an acquaintance of theirs expressed suspicions about Marnie Yang, who was said to be obsessed with Sean. Investigators learned that Marnie had been in a relationship with Sean. The two had met 6 years earlier at a Chicago Bears convention, and Sean later reached out to her for help with real estate. Marnie, a realtor, had facilitated several real estate transactions for him. Marnie, single mother of 3 children, worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, including as a realtor, a waitress, and even photographer. Over time, she grew close to Sean, and their relationship continued up until Roni's murder. It was later revealed that they had slept together the day before the crime. This led investigators to scrutinize Marnie more closely. After speaking with her family and friends, they concluded that Marnie was obsessed with Sean. She viewed him as her possession and wouldn't leave him alone. When she discovered he had other relationships, she became furious. Her jealousy drove her to want he all to herself, believing he should belong only to her. She calls him her boyfriend, despite the fact that their relationship was short and fleeting. Detectives questioned Marnie, but she firmly denied any involvement in the crime. Despite this, she was unable to provide an alibi for the time of the murder. She claimed she was at home with her children, but the lack of evidence to support this made her the primary suspect. Detectives believe Marnie fits the description of the person they are looking for. With her petite build, she could easily be mistaken for a teenager if she was wearing a sweatshirt and hood. After obtaining a search warrant for the home, police discovered several important clues. Upon examining Marnie's computer, they discovered she had access to Sean's email and had been secretly monitoring his messages. Among the emails, they found letters from Monica to Sean written in broken English. Marnie had mimicked Monica's writing style, including the grammatical errors. She sent anonymous letters to several women involved in Sean's life, such as Ronnie and his mother. These letters contained accusations about Sean's relationships, and investigators concluded that her intention was to frame Monica as the main suspect. However, her plan ultimately failed. The police discovered a broken computer hard drive and several bank statements in Marnie's trash. The bank statements showed that she had hired a private investigator to collect detailed information about all the women in Sean's life, including their full names and addresses. Inside Marnie's apartment, investigators found postal receipts with the addresses of Ronnie and several other women who had received anonymous letters. It also came to light that Marnie owned a gun. In September 2005, she was stopped at the airport for purchasing and transporting 2 pistols and 200 rounds of ammunition. Although she provided the required paperwork, the weapons were declared and shipped to Chicago. Marnie's former lover, who was a deputy sheriff, confirmed that she owned multiple pistols and was highly skilled at shooting. One of her guns was a 9mm pistol, the same type used to kill Ronnie, though this particular weapon was never located. Investigators also learned that Marnie had attempted to construct her own silencer. Her bank statements revealed she had purchased a book titled How to Make a Disposable Silencer, along with a hacksaw and other materials from Home Depot. It can be used to make a disposable muffler. Detectives questioned Marnie about the evidence they had gathered. She said she bought the book as a joke gift for a friend and insisted she did not own a 9mm pistol or have any involvement in the crime. Despite her denials, 40-year-old Marnie was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Ronnie and her unborn child based on the circumstantial evidence. The prosecution argued that Marnie's actions were driven by jealousy. She was infatuated with Sean and obsessed with keeping him to herself. To eliminate her rival, she sent anonymous letters to other women in Sean's life, causing many of them to leave him. However, Ronnie stayed. Although upset with Sean, Ronnie maintained their relationship, especially since she was carrying his child, a child he deeply wanted. Marnie doesn't want this child to be born because she knows that it might cause Sean and Ronnie to become more attached. Marnie's primary objective was to kill both the child and Ronnie. During the trial, witnesses familiar with Marnie testified about her extreme obsession with Sean and the drastic actions she took for his attention. They revealed that she had hacked into Sean's email account, read his correspondence with other women, and angrily deleted messages before he could see them. When she discovered emails from a woman named Monica, she devised a plan. Marnie, in Monica's writing style, sent an article exposing Sean from an anonymous email account with many errors. She spent the entire day talking about Sean, causing her colleagues to become concerned about her behavior. At the trial, even Marnie's daughter, Emilian, testified against her mother. Emilian, 20, expressed concern about Marnie's erratic behavior and obsession with Sean, which seemed to have driven her out of control. Sean also took the stand, detailing his tumultuous relationship with Marnie. He described their relationship as intense, but revealed that Marnie became deeply upset when she found out about other women in his life. She tried every way to keep him, but the obsession in her actions eventually drove him away. Sean said he had been planning to break up with her. When asked whether he believed Marnie could have murdered Ronnie, who was pregnant, he hesitated and expressed doubt. The prosecution's key witness was Christy Passion, a friend of Marnie's. Christie testified that Marnie had been reading Sean's emails and frequently expressed dissatisfaction with his relationships with other women. In the summer of 2007, Marnie confided in Christie about her frustration over Sean dating other women and even mentioned plans to kill him. At the time, Christie took it as a joke and assumed she was simply venting. However, when Marnie discovered that Roni was pregnant, her focus shifted. She saw Roni as her main rival and became determined to eliminate Roni's at any cost. She told Christie about her plans to kill Roni instead of Sean, believing this would allow her and Sean to be happy together. Christie once again paid no attention to this, thinking it was just Marnie's imagination. Marnie later admits to Christie that she brought the weapon to Roni's apartment, but could not bring herself to do it. This confession makes Christie nervous, but Christie tries to comfort her and stop her from acting on her emotions. The day before the murder, she asked Christie to read her fortune to see if she would succeed in killing Roni. As an experienced tarot reader, Christie laid out the cards, and the one Marnie chose suggested success. Obsessed with the idea of killing Roni, the pregnant woman, Marnie ignored Christie's pleas and remained determined to carry out her plan. Christie later contacted Marnie, and they arranged to meet. During their conversation, Christie secretly wore a recording device, and the recording was later used as evidence. At this meeting, Marnie confessed to killing Roni, explaining the details of the crime. She revealed that she had disguised herself by wearing a wig, dark makeup, and gloves to avoid leaving any evidence. Marnie said she knocked on Roni's apartment door, and when Roni opened it, she drew her weapon and entered the house. She acted quickly, attacked Roni before Roni could scream. She admitted to being cautious, ensuring she didn't touch anything in the apartment and keeping her gloves on to avoid leaving traces. Marnie also described renting a black car, using a disposable phone, and then throw away the murder weapon, wig, gloves, and clothing in separate trash bins. She planned the murder meticulously so that it could not be detected, but Christie would testify against her. The recorded conversation became the prosecution's most compelling piece of evidence during the trial. The police investigation showed that Marnie's work computer had directions to Roni's house saved. They also confirmed that she rented a black Volkswagen on October 3. The vehicle's route was tracked from the rental location to Roni's apartment and back. However, the defense argued that there was no physical evidence that Marnie was at the scene, including DNA, fingerprints, or phone records. The case was based largely on circumstantial evidence in Christie's testimony. The defense wanted to discredit Christie by emphasizing her dubious background. They revealed that she had once claimed to be a psychic in the U.S. Army and said she was the sole survivor of a mission in the Middle East. However, it was later proven that she had fabricated her military service and had never even been in the Middle East. She had lied to enhance her qualifications for the role. The defense argued that Christie's testimony was unreliable and accused the police of falsely assigning blame to Marnie for the murder. The defense argued that there was no concrete evidence against Marnie, other than circumstantial evidence and recordings made under duress. The lawyer argued that Marnie confessed out of fear and in an attempt to protect her children, as her eldest son was under suspicion. Furthermore, an unidentified fingerprint was discovered on the door handle of Roni's apartment. The lawyer emphasized that the fingerprint did not belong to Marnie and that the police had failed to determine who it belonged to. The prosecutor acknowledged the existence of the fingerprint, confirming it was not in any database. However, they contended that the print could have been left by anyone passing by and was not necessarily linked to the crime. Marnie was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Roni Reuter and Roni's unborn child. She received 2 life sentences without parole. She and her lawyers opposed the sentence and filed an appeal, but it was denied. Marnie later claimed that she deliberately confessed to the murder to Christie to protect her son and stop people from bothering her. However, no one believed her explanation. Why would she include so many specific details about the murder if they weren't true? This makes no sense. The defense team argued that the black car seen on surveillance footage was not the Volkswagen that Marnie had rented. They also stated that a man had informed the police he had stolen Marnie's gun months before the murder, meaning she did not possess a gun at the time. Additionally, the murder weapon was never recovered at the crime scene. Fingerprints belonging to someone else were found, and they did not match Marnie's or any family member's fingerprints. The lawyer pointed out that male DNA was discovered on the cartridges at the crime scene, but it did not match Marnie's DNA and instead belonged to an unidentified man. The defense stressed that forensic analysis of the shooting angle indicated the attacker was taller than Marnie. Crucially, new CCTV footage from a hair salon showed Sean arriving for a haircut much later than he had claimed during police questioning. The footage revealed that he arrived at 10 a.m. on the day of Ronnie's murder, and she was killed before 8 a.m. Sean had previously told police he slept until 9:15 a.m. that morning, but evidence showed he had already sent a message to Ronnie and made several phone calls by 8:50 a.m. This video exposed inconsistencies in Sean's timeline, suggesting he could have had enough time to commit the murder. While the defense suspects Sean of being the perpetrator, they have not yet succeeded in having the case reopened. Marnie is still in prison and maintains her innocence. Sean, a former Chicago Bears player, played for the team for 11 seasons from 1984 to 1994, including their Super Bowl win in 1985. Having overcome his struggles in the United States, he now lives in London, United Kingdom, where he works as an NFL analyst for Sky Sports, a British sports channel, and regularly shares his expert analysis on weekly broadcasts. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Wright was born on April 24, 1976 in Houston, Texas. Her parents, Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright, lived a simple life and raised Susan and her older sister, Cindy. From a young age, Susan was an active, friendly, and talented child. During her school years, she participated in dancing activities and aspired to become a professional choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, Susan had many fans. However, after graduating from high school, Susan's dream of becoming a student did not come true. But she did not give up, and after a short break, she saved money to continue her studies. For a long time, Susan worked as a dancer at a famous nightclub in the city. However, she soon realized that this job was not for her and decided to leave. She then used her savings to study nursing at night at a university. With the goal of becoming independent, Susan balanced her studies with a job as a waitress at a restaurant to support herself. However, after a while, Susan realized that a career in medicine was not the right path for her and paying for her tuition became difficult. Therefore, Susan decided to drop out of school and focus on her work. In 1997, Susan met Jeffrey Wright at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. She was 21 years old at the time and Jeffrey went to the restaurant for a meal. From then on, their romantic relationship began. Jeffrey was immediately attracted to the blue-eyed blonde's beauty and bright smile. He left a generous tip and became a regular customer. Finally, he mustered up the courage to ask for Susan's phone number. Susan recalls that Jeffrey began calling her every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Jeffrey arranged romantic dates and small surprises like sending flowers and touching notes to Susan's workplace. In the evenings, Jeffrey would meet her and take her home. Although Jeffrey was 8 years older than her, the age gap did not bother them. Jeffrey was attentive, sweet, and caring, and quickly won Susan's heart. However, Jeffrey had some problems with alcohol and substance abuse. Jeffrey said that he had given up drugs and promised to give up drinking completely. Susan, a naive young girl, believed him. Susan felt that together they could overcome any challenge. Shortly after Susan learned she was pregnant, she immediately shared the news with Jeffrey. Although Jeffrey initially expressed joy at the prospect of becoming a father, he had not made any decisions about the future. Jeffrey did not propose and they continued to live apart. Disturbed by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan insisted that their first child be born, and Jeffrey accepted her opinion. At the time of the marriage license, Susan was 8 months pregnant. Their wedding was a simple affair, with no guests or witnesses. A few weeks before the baby was due, they moved into a quiet house in Harris County, Texas. In December 1998, Susan gave birth to a son named Bradley. Just 3 years later, she was pregnant again. In the spring of 2002, she welcomed her second daughter, named Kay. Along the shore, the family also raised a small dog named Buck and had a spacious family car. Jeffrey worked for a local construction company, and after they had a daughter named Kay, Jeffrey agreed that Susan would stay home to care for the child. Friendly neighbors often praised Susan as a kind and caring mother. She created a cozy environment for the family. From the outside, it seemed like the perfect family. Every day, Susan has to spend a lot of time doing housework such as cleaning, organizing, cooking, and making sure everything is kept in a clean condition. Jeffrey does not want her to repeat the same recipes. The whole house has to be clean for Susan. Taking care of young children and cleaning the house at the same time can be considered impossible. Jeffrey's clothes have to be washed almost every day because he doesn't want to wear any of the same clothes again. However, following these rules manually is not easy. If Susan doesn't comply with his request, she will face insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Financially, Jeffrey is extremely frugal. Contrary to the image of a romantic man who often gives gifts and flowers, Jeffrey only gives Susan $100 a week to cover household expenses. At the same time, he also asked her to settle all expenses and provide receipts. Jeffrey also broke his earlier promise to quit drinking. However, the real problems were just beginning. Jeffrey relapsed and started using drugs again. Under the influence of these substances, Jeffrey would become aggressive and would hurt his wife and son. Whenever Susan asked Jeffrey to stop using drugs and go to rehab, Jeffrey responded with anger. Jeffrey saw no problem with his actions and believed that Susan knew about Jeffrey's drug and alcohol use before Susan married him, so she should accept it and live with it. Jeffrey's parents also knew their son's weakness and sympathized with Susan. However, they felt helpless and unable to help her. What Susan couldn't stand, however, was when her husband began to physically, emotionally, and even sexually abuse her. At first, he would apologize and promise not to do it again, but then he stopped apologizing and domestic violence became a daily occurrence. Jeffrey began boxing at the gym 3 times a week, finding that the sessions helped him relieve stress. On Monday, January 13, 2003, Jeffrey went to the gym after work as usual. When he returned home, he seemed stressed. While Susan was cooking dinner, Jeffrey decided to tell his son about the sport of boxing and teach him some basic techniques. While teaching his son boxing, Jeffrey lost control and hit the boy. The child burst into tears, and Jeffrey tried to comfort the child, hoping his wife wouldn't hear. Susan pretended not to notice, but this incident was the last straw for Susan. After dinner, Susan went to put the children to bed while Jeffrey remained in the bedroom. When Susan entered the room, Jeffrey attacked her violently. Susan thought that Jeffrey was trying to kill her with a knife. However, she reacted and realized that Jeffrey did not have a knife in his hand. Susan decided to use her dancing skills to seduce Jeffrey and lower his guard. Susan entered the room in a short silk robe and performed the dance for her husband. Susan then proposed a game, which Jeffrey agreed to participate in. In this game, Susan used 3 reins to tie Jeffrey's right hand and right leg to the bed. Jeffrey's left leg was secured with a silk strip from her robe. While Jeffrey was tied up, Susan used her panties to spank him, forming part of the intimate game. Susan gently turned off the lights. Jeffrey was now bound hand and foot, and a gag was stuffed into his mouth. The din candles were the only remaining light. Susan then moved the bubbling hot wax onto Jeffrey's chest. Susan then continued pouring the hot wax onto his genitals, and the pain quickly became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself, tried to scream, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Susan continued to beat Jeffrey with a small, sharp knife she had taken from the kitchen. Susan started at the groin area, moving up and down, cutting Jeffrey's genitals, legs, stomach, chest, arms, neck, and face. At first, Susan moved slowly, complaining loudly with each slash, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had endured. Then Susan began to cry and stabbed faster and faster. Her actions showed that Susan was in a state of extreme despair and emotional turmoil. Susan could not stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. Susan sat by the bed next to Jeffrey's body. However, after a few hours, Susan realized that the bedroom was covered in blood and she had to clean it up before morning. Susan carefully watched the window, making sure no neighbors were watching. At this point, Susan saw a hole in the backyard, which Jeffrey had dug over the weekend to build a fountain. Susan quickly moved Jeffrey's body from the bedroom to the yard, using a garden wheelbarrow to move it. Susan decided that the pool would be Jeffrey's final resting place. After calming down, Susan spent the rest of the day, before dawn, cleaning up the evidence of the attack. Susan had to wash the blood off the floors, walls, and carpets. The carpets had large stains that could not be removed. Susan added bleach to the stains, hoping that the chemicals would erase any traces of what had happened in the room. That morning, Susan called her husband's family in Austin, Texas, sobbing. Susan told them that her husband Jeffrey, while drinking and using drugs, had attacked Susan and their young son. Jeffrey then destroyed the house, spilling a bottle of bleach on the carpet before leaving, declaring that Jeffrey did not want to continue the marriage. When Jeffrey's parents heard that Jeffrey had been beating their son, they were shocked. They knew Jeffrey wasn't perfect, and they felt sorry for Susan. They offered to let Susan and the children stay at their house for a while, but Susan refused. Instead, Susan said she would file a police report and tell them everything that had happened in the family. Then, when Jeffrey suddenly went missing, Jeffrey's mother, Mrs. Wright, went to the police station to report the incident. Susan said Jeffrey had been violent towards Susan and the children. As a result, Susan had to file for a restraining order, which meant that Jeffrey would not be allowed near Susan and the children. When Susan filed for the restraining order, Susan presented evidence of her injuries, such as bruises and cuts on her arms. Susan said the injuries were caused by Jeffrey during a fight when he hit her with a key. Susan's children were also victims, especially Bradley, who was hit by his father and had minor bruises on his face. At first glance, the story told by Susan seemed plausible. Jeffrey, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, attacked Susan and her young son, after which Jeffrey became frightened and ran away. But over time, Jeffrey stopped communicating. And Jeffrey fled without taking his belongings, papers, and even his cell phone from home. Jeffrey did not go to work or to his parents' house, and none of his friends or neighbors saw Jeffrey. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Susan's situation is not optimistic, as she finds it unbearable to be in the house where Susan murdered Jeffrey and buried his body in the yard. Susan begins to feel as if Jeffrey is still alive and about to rise from the grave to take revenge. Susan is on the verge of going crazy, and their dog Buck keeps barking and trying to dig up the burial site. On January 17th, after dropping her children off at school, Susan went to her mother Velma's house. Her mother learned about the incident and asked Susan, "You killed your husband, didn't you?" Susan burst into tears and nodded. Susan confessed what had happened and revealed where Susan had hidden Jeffrey's body, saying she didn't know what to do next. On her mother's advice, Susan contacted attorney Neil Davis the next day and confessed that Susan had killed her husband. Attorney Davis worked out a solution and thought carefully about possible scenarios. On January 19th, Neil Davis called the Harris County District Attorney's office and reported that Susan Wright had killed her husband Jeffrey and buried his body in the backyard. Susan Wright was ready to give a statement to the police. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police and stated that she would give a full confession. On January 24, 2003, Susan went to the police and confessed the whole thing. However, when she was interviewed, Susan's story was unclear and full of contradictions. Susan was confused about the details and sometimes contradicted herself. Susan also claimed that Jeffrey was still alive and that she was afraid of him. As a result, Susan requested protection. As a result, Susan underwent a psychological evaluation and was diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression. However, Susan was still able to understand her actions. Following Susan's statement, the police arrived at the scene and removed Jeffrey's body from the makeshift grave in the backyard. The medical examiner was surprised to see numerous injuries on the body. The medical examiner's team counted a total of 193 stab wounds on the body. Specifically, there were 8 wounds in the groin area, about 30 wounds in the legs, 23 wounds in the shoulders and arms, 22 wounds in the abdomen, 46 wounds in the arms, 23 wounds in the neck, and 41 wounds in the face. However, only 1 wound to the head could be considered the direct cause of death. All other cuts were superficial and did not pose an immediate threat to life. This left Jeffrey with a long and painful death. Police saw deep marks on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles from the ropes and belt Susan used to restrain him. These injuries indicated that Jeffrey had tried to free himself but was unsuccessful. Additionally, traces of candle wax were found on Jeffrey's gun and groin area. Susan claimed that it was an accident as her husband accidentally turned a burning candle on himself, but police believe the hot wax was more likely a form of torture inflicted on Jeffrey to cause pain. Susan's underwear was still in Jeffrey's mouth, acting as a gag to prevent Jeffrey from screaming or calling for help. Toxicology reports revealed traces of alcohol and several controlled substances in Jeffrey's system, suggesting that Jeffrey may have acted aggressively under the influence of these substances. The bedroom where the massacre took place appeared normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet, suggesting that Susan had spent a lot of time cleaning and hiding the evidence. When experts used chemicals and special equipment to detect the blood traces that had been cleaned up, a completely different view of the project emerged. Blood was found everywhere, including on the ceiling and the red blood cell cushion. The trial began in late February 2004. By that time, Susan had been in custody for a year and her children were in the care of her parents and sister Cindy. Susan's attorney had prepared extensively for the trial and worked extensively with Susan. When questioned, Susan recounted the sad story of that terrible night and the events leading up to it. Susan said she had endured years of abuse and resistance. However, when Jeffrey began abusing the children, Susan could not take it anymore. Susan recounted that fateful evening, Jeffrey came home from the gym in a state of agitation. Jeffrey then began teaching their 5-year-old son punching and fighting techniques. When the son became scared and refused, Jeffrey punched him in the face. Susan then put the child to bed and decided to talk to Jeffrey about seeking help at a clinic for alcohol and drug abuse. However, Jeffrey became angry and decided to leave, taking the keys with him. While Susan tried to stop Jeffrey, a fight broke out between the two, leaving Susan with injuries to her palm and wrist. During the attack, Jeffrey attacked her, causing her to fall to the floor and briefly lose consciousness. When Susan regained consciousness, she found Jeffrey holding a knife in his hand. Susan could not explain how the knife ended up in her hand afterward. Susan's attorney argued that Susan's mental instability was the cause of her actions, causing Susan to lose control of her attacks until she had inflicted multiple injuries on Jeffrey. Susan said she tied the rope and belt around Jeffrey's hands after inflicting multiple injuries, then used a wheelbarrow to carry Jeffrey out into the yard. As for the scraps found, Susan claimed they came from a candle that Susan had left on her bedside table that night when she had left the nightlight on. Susan could not explain why her underwear appeared in Jeffrey's mouth. The prosecution's argument and conclusion were more convincing and reasonable. Experts demonstrated that the deep wounds and abrasions on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles were inflicted while he was still alive, indicating that the binding was part of an intimate game that Susan used to lure Jeffrey into a trap. Therefore, it was reasonable that Susan's underwear had replaced the gag in Jeffrey's mouth. Furthermore, all of the wounds were inflicted at a certain angle, as if Susan were on top of Jeffrey's body, sitting on him, rather than in the midst of a struggle, which would have resulted in a different type of injury. All of the cuts were made from the front while Jeffrey was lying on his back and firmly immobilized. The question remains whether Susan planned Jeffrey's death. The prosecution claims that Susan planned the whole thing in hopes of receiving a large insurance payout. The case was widely publicized as Susan was dubbed the Blue-Eyed Butcher or the Blonde Meat Grinder by the press. Jeffrey's relatives demanded the harshest punishment for Susan. At first, people asked for a life sentence for Susan. However, in March 2004, Susan was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Susan did not think about the judge's decision and was completely emotionless. A year later, Susan's attorneys attempted to appeal the conviction, but it was denied. With new developments and a reduced sentence in 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal. This time, a new witness testimony significantly affected the outcome of the case. Misty McKell, wife of former NFL champion Steve McKell, had a close relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was even engaged to Jeffrey for a year. However, Misty McKell shared horrific experiences of being physically and mentally abused by Jeffrey, causing her to abandon plans for marriage and end the relationship permanently. After considering Misty McKell's testimony, Susan's sentence was reduced to 20 years. In 2014, when she was 38 years old, Susan was eligible for parole once but was denied. Susan was also denied a second time in July 2017. Finally, after 16 years in prison, Susan was released in the winter of 2020 when she was 44 years old. Susan Wright's case was widely covered in the media and aired on the U.S. national television network Court TV. The story was later made into several popular television documentaries, including 48 Hours Mystery and The Secret Lives of Stepford Wives. In 2012, the feature film Blue-Eyed Butcher was released, starring actress Sarah Paxton as Susan Wright. Additionally, in 2014, Canadian documentary filmmaker Chloe Ballant discovered a short film inspired by Susan Wright's trial. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of John Parker. John Parker was born in 1970 in Indiana, United States, to a middle-class family and have a brother. From a young age, John had a strong ambition to succeed. He valued being independent and continually sought ways to better himself, as well as looking for opportunities for growth and advancement. After graduating from high school, John began searching for ways to earn money. According to his brother, John's first job was as a waiter's assistant in a restaurant. However, he quit his job soon after, but the exact reason for his departure is unclear. Undeterred, John quickly found a new job that offered more freedom, allowing him to explore and develop his passion for pursuing a career in sales. John started working as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. Initially, his family teased him, but he soon demonstrated his capabilities to everyone, and he also found his purpose in life. By the end of his first year, John had become one of the company's top salesmen, and he was eager to continue achieving more. John worked extremely long hours, typically between 12 to 16 hours a day. As a result, he became a top sales performer, earning recognition at company meetings. John's success also made him a source of inspiration and guidance for his fellow salespeople. During this time, he met Judy, a 20-year-old woman from a low-income family in Texas. Judy was born in October 1969. She was confident, extremely, and outgoing. Although John wasn't planning to hire any additional salespeople at the time, but she was able to convince John that she had what it took to achieve great success in sales. Judy's past was marked by significant life events. With her parents' consent, she had gotten married at the age of 14 and had 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks, but it ultimately ended in divorce. When she met John, she was determined to start a new chapter in her life. John decided to give Judy a chance, taking her under his wing as a mentor in vacuum cleaner sales. Not only did Judy prove herself as a valuable member of the sales team, but she also won John's heart. As time passed, they began to date. John's life was thriving, both personally and professionally. He has built a solid reputation for his sales and training abilities, and most importantly, he has the love and support of his wife Judy. John expanded on his experience by starting his own business in Michigan, specializing in selling and servicing Kirby vacuum cleaners. He also offered training sessions for salespeople, sharing his personal secrets and enthusiasm that had made him successful in the industry. John's company quickly rose to the top in the area, and he credited his success to Judy's support. After establishing his career, John and Judy got married in 1992. The couple had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica. As John's business continued to thrive, they relocated to better homes, providing their children with access to excellent schools, luxury cars, and regular vacations. Initially, John had a very good relationship with Judy's stepchildren, Christina and Daniel. Christina was a sweet girl, while Daniel was more energetic and mischievous. The family enjoyed a comfortable life, thanks to John's growing wealth. He openly showcased his success to motivate the young salespeople he trained, demonstrating the potential rewards of hard work and determination. However, as Judy's children entered their teenage years, problems arose. Christina associated with a group of friends who had unhealthy habits, and as a result she started drinking with them. According to some reports, Christina has also used drugs. Meanwhile, Daniel, 13, often appears angry and doesn't seem to fit in with his friends. On one occasion, Daniel took John's car and recklessly drove around the neighborhood with friends, damaging several mailbox posts. The next day, John visited each affected house, compensating the homeowners for the damage, to prevent them from filing a police report about the boys' actions. Around this time, John was also summoned to Daniel's school that the boy had misbehaved and they needed to discuss the issue. John and Judy's relationship became strained after he got into a physical altercation with Daniel. After 9 years together, Judy took her family to Texas to visit her childhood home and meet her brother. During the trip, Judy confided in her brother about her troubled marriage and John's mistreatment of her children. However, the situation was more complex. Judy's older children were misbehaving, and she took their side, which added to the tension. Things escalated when John suspected Judy of having an affair with one of his employees. John installed cameras in the office to gather evidence. When he obtained proof of Judy's infidelity, his life was turned upside down, and his demeanor changed drastically. He began to drink heavily, which led to intense arguments with Judy and rough treatment of their children. One incident involved his daughter Tiffany, who was beaten with a belt for not bringing her homework to school. When her teacher noticed the marks the next day, she reported it to social services. Before they arrived, John warned the 4 kids that if they wanted to maintain their luxurious lifestyle, they should say nothing about the beating. Consequently, Tiffany blamed her stepbrother Daniel. John's bad mood not only affected his family but also his employees and clients, who suffered from his outbursts of rage. To keep Judy away from her lover, John moved the family to an exclusive area in Crown Point, Indiana. Despite his hopes for a fresh start, things did not improve. Judy started to improve her appearance by losing weight and changing her look, while John let himself go, growing his beard, smoking, and wearing only jeans. He became increasingly distracted. The business struggled due to John's condition, nearly going bankrupt and forcing him to sell his boat to stay afloat. Office rumors swirled about Judy's alleged affair with Jeff, John's right-hand man, fueling more arguments. At one point, Judy told John she wanted a divorce, but it wouldn't be straightforward. John felt he had given Judy everything, rescuing her from poverty, accepting her children, and showering her with luxuries. When love turns to resentment, he began cutting off Judy's financial sources. John made it clear that if she left, she would leave with nothing, and he had a secret recording of her infidelity with the office employee. This was the situation at the start of 2003. The tension between John and Judy affected the children, whose behavior worsened. Even Tiffany was grounded during the holidays for starting a fire on school grounds with a friend. The arguments finally ended on Thursday, April 17, 2013, when John and Judy went out to dinner. They were likely looking for a way to resolve issues and reduce the tension between them. After dinner, the couple called home to check on their kids and told them they would be back soon. Then, Christina asked them to stop by the office because she had left a school notebook there. As John and Judy left the restaurant, John decided to bring the leftover dinner to Jeff, who was supposedly working late at the office. John and Judy arrived at the office, located in a deserted industrial area. Just before 10 p.m. John went inside to talk to Jeff, while Judy picked up Christina's notebook and returned to the car. A few minutes later, John came out of the office and opened the rear door on the driver's side of the car to look for something. Suddenly, 2 loud bangs were heard, and John collapsed on the ground. Judy and Jeff immediately called 911. Police and medical units arrived at the scene within minutes. Unfortunately, John, 33 years old, had been shot in the back of the head and was pronounced dead at the scene. When questioned by the police, Judy, who was inside the car when the incident happened, was unable to provide much information. Judy said she was sitting in the car when John came out of the office and opened the back door on the driver's side. Immediately, she heard 2 loud shots. Judy's reaction was to hide behind the seat. When she finally lifted her head, she caught a glimpse of a man in dark clothing running away from the car. Initially, it seemed like a robbery because John's wallet was missing. However, as investigators examined the scene more closely, they began to have doubts. John and Judy hadn't told anyone they would be there, which raised several questions. What were the chances of a random robbery in a deserted industrial are very rare. If the motive had been robbery, it's puzzling that the perpetrator would first kill John and then take his wallet. This is especially confusing since John was visibly wearing a valuable gold Rolex and other easily accessible jewelry. Typically, thieves would thoroughly search the victim's pockets in such situations. The fact that this didn't happen raises more questions than answers. 2 bullet casings were found at the scene, which supports Judy's account of hearing 2 shots. One shot killed John instantly. But there's no official information about the second shot. With many unanswered questions, investigators started work taking a statement from Judy. Judy reported that her husband had argued with an employee from his company prior to the incident and identified the individual. However, she couldn't provide any additional information beyond her initial statement at the scene. Jeff, who was inside the office, also couldn't offer any useful insights, as when he heard the gunshots and went outside, it was all over. Meanwhile, authorities informed Christina, a Parker resident, that her stepfather had passed away. With robbery ruled out as a motive, detectives turned their attention to John's circle of relatives and colleagues. They began with an employee who had allegedly argued with John, but the employee claimed they had resolved their issues amicably and had a verified alibi. The investigation expanded, include John's business partners, employees, competitors, friends, and family. Judy's behavior during the funeral surprised and puzzled many people, as she seemed cheerful and socialized with friends, which was unexpected given the circumstances. Her ex-husband was also seen casually reading a newspaper at the funeral. For days after the murder, police brought in 15-year-old Daniel for questioning because he was accused of hiring gang members to kill his stepfather, John. When questioned, Daniel admitted to paying someone to hurt John, but claimed he only wanted him injured, not killed. The police arrested one of the young men that Daniel had hired, but they were released after their alibi checked out. Daniel was also released after 9 days due to lack of evidence and his status as a minor. Later, it was discovered that John had problems with Judy's children, which led to further investigation into Daniel and raised suspicions about Judy's 17-year-old daughter, Christina. When questioned, Christina denied any involvement, and this lead also went nowhere. However, investigators were left wondering who was providing the money for these schemes, and they suspected Judy was the source. Further investigation showed that Judy and John's relationship had gotten much worse before he died, and Judy's affair was discovered. However, sources revealed that John had no plans to leave his wife and was trying to save their relationship. Judy's main reason for targeting her husband seemed to be financial gain, as detectives found that John had 2 life insurance policies worth $1 million. After John's death, Judy tried to claim this money, but the insurance company initially refused to pay due to the ongoing investigation. Receiving the insurance money becomes even more complicated when John's father suspects Judy of being involved in his son's death. Despite these leads, the case stalled due to lack of concrete evidence. Over time, the John family household underwent substantial transformations. Judy was rarely at home, as she was busy with her new partner, Jeff, who was John's trusted manager. In Judy's absence, Christina and Daniel took care of Tiffany and Erica. Later, Judy and Jeff moved out of state with Tiffany and Erica, while Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina, who was pregnant and had a boyfriend, stayed in the house. Although the investigation had stalled, authorities kept the case open, regularly reviewing the files in hopes of finding new leads. Their persistence paid off when they came to question some of Christina and Daniel's classmates. These schoolmates admitted to selling a firearm to Christina and Daniel. This information prompted detectives to investigate a piece of land owned by the family that Christina used for target practice. Upon inspection, several bullet casings were found. Laboratory analysis revealed a crucial clue: the bullet casings matched those from the crime scene where John was killed. In 2007, a colleague who was a narcotics officer provided additional information. The narcotics officer had been tracking Christina's ex-boyfriend, who was involved in a drug case and was arrested, to request a lighter sentence. Christina's former boyfriend revealed a conversation he had with Judy. In this conversation, Judy mentioned that her son Daniel was the one who fired the fatal shot that killed John. When confronted with this new information, 21 years old, Christina, who was linked to the weapon used in the crime, began to cooperate. She admitted to buying the weapon and calling John and Judy on the night of the incident. She had asked them to stop by the office, claiming she needed to pick up forgotten homework. Christina confessed to being part of a plan to kill John, with her brother Daniel designated as the shooter. When Daniel was 19, he was found and arrested in Arizona. Daniel was shown new evidence about the shooting and Christina's statement. He admitted to shooting John, but said his mother, Judy, was the one who planned the whole thing. Daniel said Judy had forged checks from her company to get the $7,500 to hire someone to kill John. However, when the people she hired took the money without doing the job, Judy told them to buy a gun for Daniel to use instead. Daniel also said it was Judy's idea to make up a reason for leaving the house that night by calling about homework. He said he shot John once in the head, and the second shot was an accident that happened while he was looking through John's pockets for his wallet, as his mother had told him to do. Daniel was also told to come back home without telling his younger sisters what had happened. His sister Christina helped by keeping the girls busy watching TV. Daniel said Judy convinced them to commit the crime by telling them they were being abused by John. And Judy promises them a better life with more money and freedom. It was also discovered that Judy had previously attempted to kill her husband. She had tried to poison his food, which resulted in John being briefly hospitalized with what was thought to be food poisoning. By the end of 2007, Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to conspiracy and was released on bail. In March 2008, Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to kill his stepfather, John. As part of a deal, Daniel agreed to admit his guilt and testify against his mother. The prosecution agreed not to charge him with murder, but he still faced a prison sentence of 20 to 25 years. Daniel claimed that when he was 14, about a year before the incident, his mother and sister asked him to help kill John. His mother gave him and his sister money to buy a pistol, black clothing, gloves, and a mask to wear on the day of the crime. She also instructed him on what to do, including showering after the crime to remove gunpowder residue. Judy took responsibility for disposing of the evidence, including the gun, clothes, and her husband's wallet. In July 2009, 6 years after John's death, Judy turned herself in and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. She admitted to planning, executing, and covering up the crime. The prosecution asked for a sentence of 28 to 35 years in prison. Judy, almost 40, was sentenced to 33 years in late August 2009. Daniel was sentenced to 23 years in September, and Christina received a 5-year sentence in October. Press reports state that Daniel was released from custody in 2017. He then chose to keep a low profile. Christina served 4 years of her sentence and was released in 2013, but she tragically died from a drug overdose. This case was driven by greed. Although Judy was successful, her greater desires led her to terrible crimes. Judy's actions not only destroyed a successful business owner but also had a profound impact on her 4 children. 2 of them ended up in prison, and the younger ones were left without their parents once again. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Michael Wayne Jones. Michael Wayne Jones was born on May 1, 1981, in Brattleboro, Vermont. His life was complicated and difficult from a young age. Michael witnessed his parents repeatedly physically and mentally abusing each other, and he himself was also subjected to this abuse. When Michael was young, his father went to prison for unclear reasons, leaving him feeling empty and deeply affected. His mother remarried and had another son, Dana, bringing some happiness to Michael's life. However, their home life remained troubled. Michael's stepfather had trouble maintaining stable employment, which put a financial strain on his mother, forcing her to work 2 jobs to support the family. The stepfather was aggressive toward Michael and Dana. He used physical punishment. This has created an atmosphere that makes people feel scared and controlled. Michael was harshly punished for small mistakes, such as being late to school, and was often locked in a shed and subjected to sexual abuse. Michael's difficult life did not harden him. Instead, he showed kindness and a strong instinct to protect others, particularly his younger brother Dana. He is often the one to admit mistakes and take punishment for Dana, which brings the 2 brothers closer. Dana admired Michael's courage and love. Michael's stepfather was extremely controlling and rarely allowed him to interact with other children. His mother was too afraid of her husband to stand up for Michael or herself. This created a home environment that was isolated, secretive, and oppressive. With no outside help, Michael and Dana suffered ongoing abuse. The neighbors suspected that something was wrong in the household. In a desperate attempt to escape, Michael ran away from home but didn't know where to go. He was eventually found by authorities and shared the sad story of his family life. Unfortunately, no one helped him with his situation. Michael had difficulty expressing his genuine emotions, instead concealing them beneath a facade of indifference. He struggled with depression in his teenage years, which significantly impacted his mental well-being. However, at school, he found some relief from his struggles. Despite being introverted and feeling lonely, having responsibilities helped distract him from his difficult home life. Fortunately, Michael met Dorothy, a local business owner. Dorothy introduced him to her daughter, and although the daughter's name is not known, but Michael formed a strong bond with her. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance, navigating its share of highs and lows. This relationship brought out Michael's gentle, thoughtful, and cautious nature, revealing a more nuanced side of his personality. Dorothy was happy to see Michael in a new light, but at the same time, she felt concerned. She observed that he became uneasy whenever it was time to go home. Despite her daughter's frequent visits with Michael, he made a concerted effort to keep her away from his residence. Concerned by these signs, Dorothy decided to have deeper conversations with Michael. Michael eventually opened up to Dorothy about his concerns for his mother and brother's well-being. This enabled Dorothy to recognize the emotional burden and suffering that Michael was experiencing. After finishing high school, Michael enlisted in the United States Navy, which marked the start of a new chapter in his life. The Navy instills in him a sense of direction and purpose within a highly organized environment. As Michael developed a strong affection for the Navy, he realized that he had made the right choice. His newfound sense of happiness is largely due to his close relationship with his teammates. Although he would occasionally drink, Michael was always responsible and showed up for work, proving to be a calm and composed individual. During this time, Michael was dating a colleague. However, he quickly realized that the relationship was unhealthy when she became violent towards him. This brought back painful memories of his childhood. As his depression worsened, he realized he needed to end the relationship. Following the breakup, Michael dedicated himself to furthering his career. He pursued specialized training in combat medical care, which ultimately led to his appointment as a medic in the Marine Corps. Afterward, Michael met Sarah, and they fell deeply in love, eventually getting married. After getting married, Michael resigned from the Marines so he could devote his time to supporting his wife. Sarah had a positive impact on Michael's life, encouraging him to make good choices. Together, they had 3 children, and Michael was determined to be a devoted father, providing them with the best possible upbringing. In their relationship, Sarah often took the lead in decision-making, but Michael was always supportive of her choices. In 2011, Sarah found a job in Orange County, Central Florida, and the family moved there. She worked at the Mount Dora Animal Hospital, which was managed by Beau Delaporte. After Michael had difficulty finding a job, Sarah convinced Delaporte to take him on. She also emphasized the experience Michael had gained from his previous job. Michael quickly settled into his new role and showed outstanding commitment. Michael emanated happiness and had a clear passion for his work. Michael's positive demeanor made him highly sought after by pet owners. His employers, particularly Delaporte, grew fond of him, and their relationship blossomed into a strong friendship built on trust. Delaporte even entrusted him with some management responsibilities at the animal hospital. In 2014, Delaporte hired KCI, a new veterinary technician. Born on December 23, 1986, in Ion, Indiana, KCI was the second of 3 daughters to Nikki and David. She had 2 siblings, named Sarah and Brandy. She brought immense joy and positivity to her family, and also spread that energy to those around her. As KCI grew older, her love and concern for those around her deepened, fueled by her spiritual beliefs and moral principles. This gives her the strength to face life's challenges. In high school, KCI met Richard, and they were initially attracted to each other. However, as they dated, Richard noticed KCI's jealous and possessive tendencies. Her insecurity sometimes led to hurtful words and actions. Nevertheless, Richard remained patient and calm, and they eventually married after completing their studies. Over time, KCI's mother moved to Florida. Sarah and Brandy soon followed. Due to KCI's close relationship with her family, she and Richard relocated to Florida in 2009. After settling in, KCI worked occasionally as a transporter and sometimes as a dog groomer. She also began learning the trade of a veterinary technician. During this time, KC and Richard welcomed their first child, Cameron. KCI was devoted to Cameron's well-being and made it her top priority. A few years later, KC and Richard had their second child, Preston. The children grew in a happy environment filled with laughter and loving care. As KCI advanced in her veterinary technician career, she found a job at an animal clinic. There, she met Michael, who was Delaporte's right-hand man. Michael and KCI got along well, but Delaporte and Sarah both suspect that there may be something more than mere friendship between them. Even though both of them have families, but Michael found himself attracted to KCI. This attraction affected his focus and performance at work. Michael tried his best to satisfy KCI's needs, and she reciprocated Michael's feelings, and as a result they began an affair. Sarah and Michael decided to get a divorce, as did KCI and her spouse, Richard. After the divorce, Sarah was granted custody of her 3 children and relocated to Jacksonville. In contrast, KCI and Richard chose to share custody of their children, Cameron and Preston, according to a certain rule. KCI took her parenting responsibilities seriously and made sure to transport the children as agreed. Delaporte's frustration increased as Michael's work performance at the clinic continued to deteriorate. To make matters worse, Michael inappropriately approached other employees, overstepping professional boundaries. A betrayal occurred when Michael asked for time off, claiming his mother had passed away, only to use the leave for a beach vacation. Delaporte discovered the truth and subsequently terminated Michael's employment. Seeking revenge, Michael burglarized the clinic, stealing money, computer equipment, and even a gun. Delaporte identified Michael as the perpetrator and contacted the authorities. With KCI's assistance, Michael escaped to New Mexico but was eventually caught by the police. After serving a short prison sentence, Michael was released. Despite Michael's past actions, KCI remained devoted to him. The couple moved in together, and Michael became a stepfather to Cameron and Preston. Eventually, in 2017, around Halloween, Michael and KCI got married and started a new life together in a 2-bedroom trailer. Although the space is small, the affordable rent makes them feel grateful to have found a place where they can be together. In the same year, they welcomed their first child, Mercalli, followed by Ayana the next year. As their family grew to 4 children, Michael took on a job as a construction laborer to support them financially, while KCI dedicated herself to being a homemaker. She took great joy in every stage of her children's development and sought ways to capture those special moments. This led her to create a YouTube channel where she shared milestones of their family life. At first glance, their life seemed perfect, with Michael appearing calm and KCI's laughter frequently punctuating their videos. However, their relationship was not as it seemed. Behind closed doors, the couple frequently argued, and their disagreements had become a persistent problem. KCI's distrust of Michael led her to regularly check his phone, and she became suspicious whenever Michael worked late hours. A heated argument broke out between them on the night of July 10, 2019, while their children slept. The argument started when KCI discovered a message on Michael's phone that made her believe he was being adultery. The confrontation quickly turned violent, with KCI grabbing a baseball bat and pushing Michael. Michael then took the bat from her and, in a state of blind fury, he repeatedly struck her until she died. Michael put KCI's body in a plastic bag and hid it in a closet. He tried to clean up the scene as much as he could. The next morning, he took steps to prevent the children from finding out what happened. He then put KCI's body in his car. To avoid raising suspicion, Michael continued to post on KCI's social media accounts in the following days. On July 26, Michael sent a text to Richard, pretending to be KCI, asking him to take care of Preston and Cameron. Michael also texted KCI's mother, asking her to care for Mercalli and Ayana. When Richard arrived to pick up Preston and Cameron, he found it strange that KCI was not there and expressed his concerns to Michael. However, Michael dismissed Richard's concerns, saying KCI had left town for a few days. KCI's mother had a similar reaction when she came to pick up Mercalli and Ayana. Later that day, Michael called Sarah and told her that he and KCI were separating, and he needed to take care of the children while she worked. He then picked up the children and took them to his home. During the drive, the children noticed a strong, unpleasant smell in the car, similar to rotting meat. Michael continued to visit his children at Sarah's residence for 2 weeks, driving back and forth between his home and Sarah. Meanwhile, the body of KCI remained hidden in his car. As the days went by without hearing from her daughter, KCI's mother grew increasingly worried. On August 10th, Richard returned Cameron and Preston to Michael. This time, KCI's absence was even more noticeable, and it increased Michael's concern. During their brief conversation, Michael apologized for causing Richard and KCI to divorce, and acknowledged the challenges Richard went through in his relationship with KCI. As the new school year approached, Michael realized that the absence of the children and KCI would likely raise suspicions among the elementary school staff. This realization led to a tragic turn of events. On a night that remains unspecified, Michael took Cameron out of bed and suffocated him, then placed his body in a suitcase. The next morning, he did the same to Preston, putting his body in a garbage bag. A few days later, the owner of the trailer park where Michael lived served him an eviction notice, giving him 2 weeks to vacate the premises. Amidst this dire situation, Michael went to pick up Mercalli and Ayana. When KCI's mother saw Michael again without KCI, she became overwhelmed with anxiety and had a nervous breakdown. Her mind was consumed by a single question: where was her daughter? Michael was driving with his daughters, Mercalli and Ayana, when he was suddenly overcome with guilt. He felt trapped and decided to turn himself in at the police station. However, when he reached the door, he changed his mind and turned back home. Upon returning, he filled the bathtub with water and tragically drowned his daughters. After their deaths, he placed their bodies in a plastic container. As Hurricane Orion approached Florida in early September, a state of emergency was declared, prompting many people to seek shelter. Michael took advantage of the chaos to transport 5 bodies, including his wife and children. He loaded them into his truck and headed north to stay with Sarah. During his stay, Sarah noticed that Michael never contacted KCI or inquired about the children, which made her uneasy. However, she chose not to ask questions due to her awareness of the marital issues. After the hurricane passed, Michael's neighbors reported a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the trailer to the property owner. The owner checked the trailer, first looking through the windows and then entering it. Although the furniture and personal belongings were still there, the smell was overwhelming, but nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. KCI's mother grew desperate as she tried to make sense of her daughter's disappearance. She suspected Michael might be in trouble with the law and hiding, which could explain why her daughter was also in hiding for her own safety. Rather than waiting, KCI's mother contacted the sheriff's office and requested a welfare check at Michael's house. When officers arrived for the welfare check, they found the house empty but appeared to have been recently cleaned. However, a strong smell of decomposition lingered, contradicting the presence of cleaning supplies near the entrance. Before the officers could investigate further, the property owner arrived and asked them to leave. Meanwhile, with the bodies still in his vehicle, Michael drove out of state into Georgia. He stopped near a wooded area and disposed of the bodies of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayanna. As he continued driving and checked his GPS, Michael lost control of the vehicle and crashed. Although Michael escaped without injury, the vehicle was severely damaged. The police quickly arrived at the scene of the accident and were immediately hit with the strong, terrible odor coming from the wrecked truck. They find a suitcase in Michael's truck, and when they open it, they discovered KCI's gruesome body. Michael broke down and confessed to his heinous crimes on the roadside. He also revealed the location of the children, leading to his immediate arrest. KCI's family was devastated by the news, feeling as though their world had shattered. In shock and grief, they still do not understand why Michael could have so brutally murdered his wife and children. Sarah, in particular, felt an intense hatred towards Michael, a sentiment she had never experienced before. With a search warrant and new evidence in hand, investigators went back to KCI's house. Upon entering, they were met with a strong, unpleasant odor and a noticeable reddish stain on the carpet. The agents began collecting evidence from the scene, while the autopsies were being performed to gather more information about the tragic incident. Forensic results showed that Cameron sustained a fractured jaw with no other visible signs of trauma. But a towel was in his mouth. Preston was found with a noose around his neck. Mercalli and Ayanna were found in a small plastic bag together, which also contained a baby bottle with Ayanna's name on it and a pair of pink sandals. The cause of death for Mercalli and Ayanna was determined to be drowning. KCI's autopsy results showed a severe blunt force injury to the front of her skull and face, but no other signs of trauma were found on her body. When questioned by authorities, Michael remained calm and provided precise and honest answers. Michael even thanked the police officers who arrested him and said he felt he had no other choice. Michael provided a clear and chronological account of incident from the fight with KCI to his subsequent arrest. When asked about his motives, Michael said that his actions stemmed from the harsh life circumstances he endured, which led him to believe that his decision was the only possible solution. The tragedy profoundly affected everyone involved, but it was particularly shattering for Sarah. She found it extremely difficult to accept that her children had been exposed to and had lived with someone like Michael. As a result, Sarah struggled with mental health issues after learning the truth. Michael was subsequently charged with second-degree murder for KCI's death and 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder for the deaths of the children. Michael pleaded guilty to the charges, bypassing a trial and moving directly to the sentencing phase. A 12-person jury then had to decide between 2 sentences, life imprisonment, or the death penalty. The defense strategy focused on Michael's difficult childhood and mental health issues, highlighting various psychological disorders that may justify a reduced sentence. However, state prosecutors argued that the extreme brutality of the case worthy a death penalty. In January 2023, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, as required by state law. After a brief 99-minute hearing, the judge formally sentenced Michael to death. He also received a separate sentence of life imprisonment without parole for the murder of KCI. Michael's lawyer quickly filed an appeal following the sentencing. However, on April 28, 2023, the judge rejected the appeal and confirmed the original sentence. Prosecutors were pleased that justice had been achieved for KCI's family. Michael is still in prison, awaiting his scheduled execution. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Soni Millbrook. Soni Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981, in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She is the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and grew up in a large family with many siblings, having 2 sisters and 3 brothers. This warm and close-knit environment helped her build a special relationship with her cousin Jenny during her teenage years. Soni became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, when she was 17 years old and in the 11th grade, she met a man named Lakeith Moody, who was older than her. She soon began a relationship with him. However, the relationship was not a happy one, as Lakeith was abusive and violent, leaving visible injuries on Soni's body. Despite this, they had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Soni's mother discovered a bruise on Soni's chest. When her mother asked her about it, Soni cried and confessed that Lakeith had caused the injury. A friend of Soni's also witnessed the injury, but Soni refused to report Lakeith's behavior to the police. Lakeith often controlled Soni and tried to isolate her from her friends and family. That same year, Soni moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the management informed her of an incident at her apartment. When she arrived, she found a chaotic scene: damaged furniture, missing clothes, a destroyed television, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including under the stairs. Strangely, the mirror had the words, "Kiki loves you," with Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. Lakeith's behavior made Soni's relatives even more concerned. On October 31, 2000, Soni and her cousin, Pamela, went to a bar called The Mirage with Lakeith. While at the bar, Lakeith became aggressive towards Soni by slapping her and throwing a drink in her face. After the incident, Soni and Pamela left the bar and got into their car. According to Pamela, Soni was shaken and frightened by Lakeith's actions. Soni asked Pamela to take her home immediately because she was afraid that Lakeith would come after them. When Soni got home, she locked the door securely. An hour later, Lakeith came to the house, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela had to threaten to call the police to make Lakeith leave. Once Soni calmed down, her cousin decided to leave her alone. However, that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Soni had been hospitalized. Lakeith had forced his way into the house, and when Soni tried to end the relationship, he attacked her. He tore off Soni's clothes and hit her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She suffered bruises all over her body, loose teeth, and even lost consciousness because Lakeith choked her until she passed out. Lakeith later accidentally discovered that Soni was on birth control pills, and he attacked her again. The next morning, Sony called Pamela and asked her cousin to take her to the hospital because of serious health problems. In late 2008, Sony, then 27, worked at a Christian institute. She was considered a reliable and punctual employee. Therefore, when she took time off or missed work, it was usually due to important reasons. Once, she called her supervisor to report that she could not come to work because her face was badly bruised, and she did not want the children to see it. After she asked for a day off, Director Leslie approved it. However, when Sony returned a few days later, the bruises were so obvious that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses while working at the academy. Lakeith's violence not only affected Sony and their children but also caused concern in the community. In April 2008, Lakeith was found sitting in an SUV with a gun in his hand, despite being previously prohibited from owning a gun due to a criminal record. Furthermore, he had previously served 2 years in prison for burglary and 3 years in prison for drug possession with intent to distribute. Sony tried to avoid her boyfriend, but it was almost impossible. The situation came to a head on October 6, 2008. At that time, Sony did not arrive at the academy by 5 p.m. Her sister received a text message from Sony saying that Lakeith was holding her hostage in his home and had been beating her all day. Sony also provided her home address. Sony's sister called the police. 2 officers went to Sony's house. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer since it was locked from the inside. They then called the security department to unlock the door. When the police entered the house, they saw Sony's boyfriend jumping out of the back window of the apartment. Sony stood in the hallway, crying and unable to speak because of her grief. Her 4 children were also present, making for a very heartbreaking scene. Sony's face and neck were covered in bruises and scratches. When she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. Sony and Lakeith began arguing, and he refused to let her leave the house. She told the police that Lakeith would not let her or the children near the window. She also said that Lakeith injured one of their children by grabbing the child and preventing her from taking the child to the hospital. Sony said that her boyfriend had been both physically and verbally abusive. During one altercation, he tied a baby blanket around her neck and choked her until she lost consciousness. When the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to choke her again and said he would kill her if the police did not let him go. The police searched the area but did not find Lakeith. Sony then left the house with the children in her car. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any contact with him. However, she missed the hearing, and the protective order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead, he began arguing with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly turned violent as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She tried to break free and ran out of the apartment while Lakeith screamed and threatened to kill her. Lakeith did not catch Sony but instead kidnapped their youngest child, an infant, and drove away at high speed. A police patrol alerted to the domestic disturbance arrived as Lakeith was running away. The officers attempted to stop him, but he escaped. In early 2010, Sony, 28, was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. She had to stay home to care for her 5th child, who was 9 weeks old, because of poor health. In January, Sony and the children moved into the Budget Lodge in Memphis. However, on the first day Sony moved in, she and Lakeith's arguments became so loud that motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Sony and Lakeith could not maintain a peaceful relationship. They argued constantly, disturbing neighbors and management with the noise. On January 22, a hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a very agitated state. He arrived at a high rate of speed in Sony's car and then began yelling at her as she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In his anger, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The security guard arrived and told Lakeith not to make any noise or throw things in the hotel. Lakeith was instructed to settle the argument in his room. However, Lakeith told the security guard that he did not need to worry about it. Lakeith then locked his car and accompanied the security guard to an unoccupied room on the third floor. The security guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had. Surprisingly, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms, even though he was not registered as a guest. The next day, Lakeith and Sony moved into room 222 with their children. However, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave that evening. Although Lakeith left as requested, he soon returned. The arguments between Sony and Lakeith continued for several more days until the guard asked Lakeith to leave the hotel for good. As Lakeith left, the front desk clerk tried to calm him down. The guard also warned Lakeith not to come back that night. Lakeith got into her car and drove away. Some time later, Sony spoke to Pamela and confided that she was having problems in her life. She was staying at the motel and wanted to talk to Pamela about something important. Sony said that she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took the younger children to daycare and the older children to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door and spoke to her through the window to inform her that they needed to pay the rent or they would have to leave. The manager returned several times that day. On a visit around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to pick up the money. On January 27th, Sony did not pick up her older daughter on time. So the school secretary called the child's grandmother, Christine, to ask her to come pick up the girl. When Christine tried to contact Sony, she received no response. At around 6 p.m., she discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Concerned that she could not reach Sony, Christine asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school to find out what was wrong. They contacted the police and reported the incident at approximately 10:30 p.m. Later, on January 28th, the housekeeping manager re-entered room 222 and began taking inventory of the items that Sony and Lakeith had left behind. The room was filled with clothing in a large trash bag, which was then taken to a storage area. After the room was cleaned, it was ready for new guests. On January 29th, James and Rhonda Sargent moved into the room. They quickly noticed a foul odor and attempted to block it with incense, but were unable to eliminate it completely. They also discovered that previous tenants had attempted the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. Because the smell was so strong that they reported it. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sony's whereabouts, as that was where she was last seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was arrested on February 2nd, around 7 p.m., while inside Sony's car at a shopping center. He was held for 48 hours on a charge of car theft. During questioning about Sony's disappearance, Lakeith said he last saw her on January 26th. He explained they had met in the hotel parking lot that morning after Sony had dropped off her children at school. They went into the room, had sex, and then returned outside. Lakeith then took Sony's car keys and left the hotel. He claimed Sony planned to use her welfare and student loan money to buy a new car, so he wasn't worried about keeping her car. Lakeith also said he had been living in the car since January 26th. However, investigators discovered that Lakeith had actually been staying at a different hotel. Additionally, given the snowy weather during that time, it was unlikely that he had spent the night in the car. On February 3rd, police found a debit card with Sony's name on it and several recent purchase receipts inside the car. That same day, police also searched the clothes stored at the hotel for DNA or other evidence, but found nothing. Due to the lack of evidence linking Lakeith to Sony's disappearance, he was released. Sony's cousin and her mother had to undertake the painful task of going to the hotel where Sony was staying to collect her belongings. At that time, Sony's cousin had a bad feeling but did not find any evidence. On February 4th, the police went to Sony's cousin's house and found a DVD player in Sony's wallet. Sony's cousin said they had received the items from Moody. According to the cousin, Lakeith borrowed the DVD player on January 24th under the pretext of watching a movie and drove a red car that day. When he saw Lakeith again a few days later, the cousin asked why Lakeith did not pick up the children on January 27th. But Lakeith evaded the question. When the cousin asked about Sony's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet behind and left. Around that time, guests James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved out of room 222 because of the persistent odor. Since there were no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Later guests in room 222 also complained of a foul odor, despite the room being cleaned several times and the carpets being cleaned in early February. The odor persisted, only easing slightly over several days. On February 4th, homicide detectives arrived at the hotel to investigate. By this time, room 222 had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. As a result, the detectives were unable to enter the room to collect evidence. Instead, they asked hotel staff if they had noticed anything unusual. All staff responded that nothing was unusual. Then, on February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel and changed rooms 3 times. During one of the changes, they spent the night in room 222. While there, they informed management that the room still smelled unpleasant. To address this issue, in March, the hotel performed a more thorough cleaning of room 222. The staff cleaned the carpet, bedding, shower curtains, and window blinds. However, the results were shocking. The odor not only remained but became even more intense. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard. During the conversation, they recalled that the previous tenant, Sony, had disappeared at the end of January. The security guard recalled the events that occurred at that time and suggested that the manager check room 222 for traces of blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they found was horrifying. The 2 men entered the room where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the bed frame. The bottom of the bed frame had a cover. When they lifted the box spring, they discovered a large gap where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the sturdy edges of the bed frame, they saw the unthinkable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame was found to have many marks on it, and there were 2 pieces of broken wood near the headboard. A towel and a cloth bag were found between the legs of the body. The victim was wearing a shirt but nothing below the waist. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, under one arm, around the chest, and ended behind the back. The medical examiner concluded that it would take at least 2 to 3 minutes of sustained pressure to cause death. In order to find the killer, the police collected items from between the victim's legs for analysis. The victim's shirt had an unidentified fingerprint. In addition, the scarf and the cloth bag did not belong to the victim. DNA samples that matched Sony's genetic profile, as well as that of a woman, were discovered. More remarkably, male DNA was also found on the cable, which led to the hypothesis that Sony had died at the time she was reported missing. The coaxial cable used in the case may have come from a DVD player that Lakeith borrowed from her cousin. Lakeith had been arrested by police for illegal possession of a weapon, and he was also the last person seen with Sony alive, making him a suspect in the case. He was in Sony's car when he was arrested and taken to the Mason detention facility. On March 18, authorities launched an investigation into why the case unfolded in such a strange way. The chief of police said the victim's family deserved an explanation and acknowledged that the circumstances of the case were unprecedented, making it a shocking case of domestic violence. He also regretted that the room where Sony died had been cleaned and rented out multiple times, making it difficult for police to collect evidence. However, this explanation was met with skepticism. One of the first tenants, Rhonda, said the police should have been allowed into the room when James and Rhonda visited in January and would have found Sony sooner if they had noticed the smell of a decomposing body. Rhonda believes the police were slow in finding Sony. Following the loss, Sony's family held a funeral for her on March 24. Sony's children were placed in the care of her sister on April 1. They are currently trying to gain legal custody of the children. Sony's sister said that although the children were the primary victims, everyone in the family's lives was turned upside down by the loss. She pledged to take care of Sony's children, making sure they had enough food, clothes, and toys, and to keep them together as a family. She also said Sony had benefited from a social program, and she would continue to care for the children as her sister had. The card had been loaded with money before Sony went missing because she received an income tax refund. Police tracked the card's activity and found that it was in Lakeith's possession. During the surveillance, they noticed that the card was used on February 1 at a convenience store Sony usually visited to withdraw cash using her electronic welfare transfer card. Notably, this occurred 4 days after Sony went missing. Officers went to the store and requested the owner to show them the footage from their 16 security cameras. Through the footage, they observed that on the morning of February 1, at 11:38 a.m., a man dressed in yellow conducted a transaction at the store. He used a Sony card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdrew cash, and purchased a cigar. After making these purchases, he returned to a car driven by someone else. With all the evidence against him, Lakeith's trial began in the first week of February 2014, more than 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel involved in the crime had closed. Lakeith did not admit his guilt. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the case as the tragic end of a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, Lakeith's defense attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to establish his client's guilt. He pointed out that there were no witnesses or physical evidence to prove Lakeith's crime. The attorney also noted that the police found fingerprints on the victim's bed frame, but those fingerprints did not match Lakeith's. This suggests that someone else may have been involved in the crime. Additionally, the attorney argued that there was reason to suspect that the victim had had relationships with several other men over the years. He also emphasized that his client had never been convicted of domestic violence against the victim. Furthermore, he revealed something that the public did not know. Sony moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's home due to a rat infestation. On February 6, video footage showing Lakeith using a Sony prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented to the court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor throughout the transaction demonstrated his innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold and ruthless man with no regard for the crimes he was accused of committing. On February 7, 2014, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. On February 10, he appealed the conviction, arguing that the court had erred in considering his past acts of domestic violence and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the convictions, affirming the decision. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lauren Burke. Lauren Ashley Burke was born on December 30th, 1989, in Marietta, Georgia. Her parents, James Burke and Vivian Gershon, subsequently divorced. She had a sister named Jacqueline and a brother named Chad. After graduating from high school, Lauren attended Auburn University, where she studied graphic design, participated actively in the Delta Gamma sorority, played lacrosse, and engaged with the campus community. Lauren was described by her friends as a friendly and outstanding student, always smiling, happy, and eager to help. While in high school, she began dating a boy named Sean. After graduating, they both attended Auburn University, where they maintained their relationship. At this stage in their lives, education was a top priority for both. However, they also actively made future plans together. Sadly, not all of Lauren's dreams and aspirations were meant to be realized. On the morning of March 4, 2008, Lauren had breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend, Sean. At 11 a.m., she attended class and then called her father, James, to talk about spring break plans and a dental visit. After her conversation with her father, she went to Sean's dorm and spent time there until the evening. She had a study appointment at 8:30 p.m. with her classmate, Michael, in the library. When Lauren left Sean's room around 8 p.m., it was already dark outside. She walked to her 2001 Honda Civic, which was parked in the lot beside the dorm. This was the last time Sean saw Lauren. Michael was supposed to meet Lauren at the library, but when she didn't show up, he began calling her cell phone repeatedly. After several calls, Lauren finally answered and informed him that she wouldn't be coming to the library because she had forgotten their appointment. She hung up shortly afterward. Later, around 9 p.m., 911 received a report about an injured girl lying on the road between Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. The girl was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars, causing traffic to back up in both directions. Lauren was on her back in the middle of the road, struggling to breathe. She had multiple injuries and was only wearing socks. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived at the scene, where Lauren was unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived and found her pulse barely detectable as they loaded her into the ambulance. By 9:35 p.m., Lauren was at East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors began attempts to save her life. Earlier, at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers had received several reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus, prompting an immediate response from firefighters and police. However, amidst a crowd of curious students gathered near the burning car, police could not locate the car owner. They checked the license plates and identified the car's owner as James Burke. James Burke is the father of Lauren. The police contacted him by phone to inform him that the Honda involved in a fire belonged to his daughter. Concerned, James immediately asked about her condition, but the police had no information. They did not know where Lauren was and confirmed that she was not in the burning car. After speaking with the officer, James tried calling Lauren's cell phone, but she didn't answer, increasing his worry. Unable to get in touch with her, he first called her friends, but none could provide any details about her location or the incident. Next, he reached out to his ex-wife hoping she might have some information, but she was also unaware of what had happened. At 9:40 p.m., Vivian called her daughter's boyfriend, Sean, to inform him that Lauren was missing and her car had been burned. Concerned, Sean reached out to mutual friends to see if anyone had seen Lauren that evening. He discovered that she had canceled a meeting at the library, claiming she had forgotten about it. However, Sean knew that Lauren had not forgotten, as she had planned to go directly to the library after leaving his place about 2 hours earlier. While family and friends were trying to locate Lauren, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were working hard to save her life. They didn't know her name since she was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or identification. Sadly, despite the doctor's best efforts, they could not save Lauren's life, and she was pronounced dead about an hour after arriving at the hospital. The cause of death was a single bullet wound that had penetrated both of her lungs. Experts determined that the gun was fired from just a few inches away from her skin. Police officers, while investigating the connection between Lauren's death and a burned-out car on campus belonging to a missing person, quickly identified the victim as Lauren Burke. The day after her death, on March 5, 2008, James traveled from Atlanta to identify his daughter's body. The news of Lauren's death rapidly circulated throughout the campus. Auburn University issued a statement regarding Lauren's passing, advising students and staff to be more vigilant both on and off campus, while also reassuring them that the campus remains safe. The statement emphasized, "Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety." Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Stouffer stated, "We are dedicating all our resources to finding the person responsible for this crime. Auburn, Alabama is a peaceful community for students, and incidents like this affect us deeply. When someone is harmed or loses their life, it impacts us all. We will not stop until we identify the perpetrator." He also mentioned that Alabama Governor Bob Riley has announced a $10,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in Lauren's case. Lauren's burned car was transported to the Auburn Police Department, where investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's office examined the charred interior. They discovered pieces of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, suggesting that the car's interior may have been the crime scene and that the arsonist intended to destroy evidence by setting it on fire. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend, but none could identify anyone who wanted to harm her or had the motive to do so. Investigators searched Sean's dorm room, where Lauren had been before her death, but found no evidence linking him to the crime. After talking to Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his call, he heard a sound that resembled a moving car. Additionally, it was discovered that someone had used Lauren's bank card multiple times shortly after she was found on the road. This suggested that the person who used her bank card might be connected to her incident, prompting the police to start searching for him. Less than 3 days after Lauren's passing, an unexpected event occurred. On March 7, 2008, at 9:55 a.m., a man of African descent assaulted a 72-year-old woman in the parking lot of a Walmart in Newnan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn. As she was getting into her car, he struck her on the head, threatened her, and ordered her to enter the passenger seat. After getting into the driver's seat, he attempted to flee the parking lot but realized that an eyewitness was following him while on the phone. The thought that the eyewitness might call the police made the man return to the Walmart parking lot. He parked the stolen vehicle, got out, ran to a nearby Chrysler Sebring, entered it, and quickly drove away. A few hours later, four officers pursued the fleeing Chrysler at high speed towards Columbus, West Georgia. The driver ignored all attempts to stop, putting other road users at risk. During the pursuit, police saw the driver throw something out of the window. One of the police teams stopped to search for the object and found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. The chase continued until high vehicle broke down, causing smoke to pour from the hood. The driver suddenly stopped in the road and opened the door. A police officer on a motorcycle, chasing the suspect, collided with the open door. The impact caused the officer to be thrown over the handlebars and onto the pavement, but he was fortunately not seriously injured. The suspect then ran into the nearby woods in an attempt to escape. However, the police quickly apprehended him and placed handcuffs on his wrists. He was Courtney Lockhart, born on October 20th, 1984. His family remembers him as a friendly and fun-loving person until he joined the U.S. Army. He was deployed to Iraq in 2004 and returned in 2005, but he came back a changed man. His mother observed that he was no longer the Courtney she once knew. She noted that he had been cheerful before his deployment, but after returning from Iraq, he never smiled again. He became very cautious about his surroundings and sometimes even hid in the closet or under the bed. In 2006, Courtney and his girlfriend, who had already broken up, welcomed a daughter. That same year, he faced a court-martial for assaulting fellow soldiers, using illegal drugs, and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention and was dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As 2008 neared, Courtney's behavior deteriorated significantly. He rarely showered, stopped seeing his daughter, and became severely addicted to illegal drugs. In February 2008, he began a series of burglaries. Aside from one robbery at a convenience store, his approach was consistent. He would approach women from behind as they were getting into their cars in parking lots, threaten them with a gun, demand their purses, and try to steal their cars. One of these attacks led to the death of Lauren. Courtney's crime spree ended on March 7, 2008, when he attacked a 72-year-old woman and could not escape from the police. After his arrest, 23-year-old Courtney was brought to the police station, where he confessed to kidnapping and killing Lauren. The interrogation was videotaped and served as crucial evidence during the trial. Furthermore, Lauren's personal items, including her iPod and bank cards, were discovered in his car. Courtney provided a detailed description of the events from the day he kidnapped Lauren, which took place on Tuesday, March 4, 2008. Courtney woke up in his Chrysler Sebring after spending the night in his car near East Alabama Medical Center. He was in need of money, so he drove around Auburn searching for a potential target. It's important to mention that all his victims were women. He never targeted men. His drive took him to Auburn University, where he parked near the student dormitories. He spent several hours in his car observing the students. Around 8 p.m., he saw a girl walk up to the car next to him and casually open the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking much, Courtney grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind, pressing the gun against her. He asked her how much money she had. When she didn't respond, he forced her into the front passenger seat of the car and took the driver's seat. Courtney claimed that Lauren didn't speak but screamed in fear. Once she calmed down, she took out $200 from her purse, gave it to him, and pleaded with him to let her go. Instead of leaving, he ordered Lauren to undress at gunpoint. Fearing for her safety, Lauren complied, removing all her clothing except for a pair of socks. Courtney believed that by making her undress, she would be less likely to try to escape. He then drove around Auburn, controlling the car with one hand while aiming the gun at Lauren with the other. As she tried to convince him not to go through with his plan, he lamented that his life was over. In response, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At one point, Lauren's phone rang. Courtney urged her to answer it and come up with a believable excuse. It was Michael calling, who was waiting for Lauren at the library. When she picked up the phone, she quickly said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up. Courtney mentioned that they continued driving through the city, while Lauren persistently tried to persuade him to let her go, insisting that she could help him through his troubles. While driving on Highway 147, Lauren suddenly opened the door and attempted to jump out of the moving car. At that moment, Courtney accidentally fired a shot. The bullet struck both of Lauren's lungs, and she also suffered injuries from the fall. Despite her injuries, she was able to wave to passing drivers until she eventually lost consciousness. Courtney told investigators that he parked near the church and observed as cars began to stop next to Lauren on the pavement. Realizing that the police would arrive soon, he quickly fled, intending to destroy any evidence left in the car. Investigators began to question the truthfulness of Courtney's testimony. They suspected that Courtney had made Lauren undress, not to prevent her from escaping as he claimed, but for another reason altogether. However, Lauren managed to jump out of the moving car, foiling Courtney's intentions. The investigators also questioned whether Courtney had accidentally shot Lauren, as it seemed unlikely. He had served in the army and was familiar with firearms. It appeared more plausible that Lauren recognized Courtney wouldn't let her go and believed her only chance for escape was to jump out. As she opened the door and jumped out of the car, Courtney deliberately shot her. Ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun that Courtney had discarded while fleeing from the police. Experts conducted tests and determined that the gun could not have discharged accidentally. The trigger needed to be pulled firmly to fire a shot. Lauren's family and friends held a farewell for her on March 9th, the same day investigators questioned Courtney for the second time. The following day, he was officially charged multiple times in connection with the Lauren Burke case. The trial commenced on November 8, 2010. Courtney's lawyers argued that their client suffered from a mental illness linked to his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was unintentional. Court records show that Courtney pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. A psychologist testified in court, stating that Courtney had an IQ of 86, which is below average, and exhibited some symptoms from his combat experience, although he did not have PTSD. The psychologist also described Courtney as immature and lacking clear judgment. The state tried to present evidence about Courtney's other crimes and his misconduct in the military, but the trial judge did not allow it. After the trial's guilt phase, the sentencing phase began right away. Courtney brought in witnesses and evidence to portray himself as a war hero who was mentally affected by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury reached a special verdict, noting that an additional aggravating factor was that a life was taken during the kidnapping. The jury unanimously recommended a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. However, the trial judge ultimately rejected the jury's recommendation for a lesser sentence and sentenced Courtney to death. In a detailed 28-page order, the judge outlined his reasons for this decision. He emphasized that the severity of the kidnapping made the death penalty justified. The victim, who was unarmed and chosen at random, was alone when she was abducted. The judge pointed out that the crime was particularly horrifying because it occurred on a college campus, a setting where students expect to feel safe. Courtney not only forced the victim into her own car but also made her undress and threatened her with a gun to prevent her from escaping. The court highlighted that the jury did not know about Courtney's criminal activities or the real details of their military service. While the jury received some information about Courtney's service, they were not informed about the complete disciplinary history. The judge noted that if the jury had been aware of this additional information, their recommendation for sentencing would probably have been different. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Courtney was on death row in Alabama, continuing his efforts to appeal his sentence. After being convicted and sentenced to death, he first appealed to an Alabama court, which upheld his sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Courtney's request for a retrial. He subsequently appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama, but his motion was denied again in September 2014. In January 2015, Courtney appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States, but in April 2015, his petition was also denied. In 2018, Courtney attempted once more to contest his sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization, representing him, argued that the attorneys who defended Courtney in 2010 had mishandled his case. Although there were some issues with Courtney's defense in 2010, these issues did not affect the final decision and his death sentence was upheld. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals confirmed Courtney's death sentence. Lauren's parents are determined to prevent the overturning of Courtney Lockhart's death sentence. Jim, Lauren's father, stated, "Courtney Lockhart was responsible for my daughter's death. He deserves the death penalty." Vivian, Lauren's mother, added, "He didn't give her a second chance, so he shouldn't be given one either." Currently, Courtney Lockhart is still on death row in Alabama. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Annie Tayan. Annie Tayan, born May 1, 1965, was raised by her mother and has a lively personality. She loves to dance, play, and appreciate the simple pleasures of life. Annie cherished the dream of a large family, considering motherhood her main aspiration. She became a mother at a young age, giving birth to her first son, Jimia, when she was 18 and her second son, Sean, just a year later. When she turned 20, she had a daughter named Shane. Unfortunately, shortly after Shane was born, the children's father left Annie and chose not to be involved in their lives, leaving her with the hardships of single motherhood. Annie managed a household of 3 young children while living in a rented apartment in Maine. In 1987, when her youngest daughter, Shane, was just 6 months old, 22-year-old Annie began a new chapter in her life. She met Michael Palin, 32, a Navy officer stationed on the aircraft carrier Bramby. Their meeting took place in Portland, Maine, where Michael's ship was docked, and he felt a strong attraction to Annie during their waterfront encounter. Originally from Charleston, South Carolina, Michael was a respected Navy member, best known for his work as a computer systems operator. He was actively involved in military operations and received several awards for his service. Annie found Michael's Navy career impressive and quickly fell in love, telling a friend that he was the man she believed was truly worthy of her affections. After a few months of dating, Annie and Michael decided to move in together, starting a family with 2 sons and a daughter. Unfortunately, their lives changed completely when a fire broke out in their apartment. Annie was out at the time, leaving Michael at home with the children. Michael, along with Jimia and Sean, escaped, but Shane, who was too young to walk, was left behind. When Annie returned, she tried to enter the burning apartment to rescue Shane but was stopped by neighbors. The loss of Shane had a profound impact on Annie, who felt that the tragedy had left an irreplaceable void in her heart. As the police investigated the fire, they struggled to determine the exact cause of the fire. The circumstances surrounding the fire aroused the police's suspicions. However, the investigation ended without anyone being held accountable. After the tragedy, Annie and her sons moved into her mother's home in Portland, while Michael focused on his work and chose to live in the barracks. A few months after the move, another disturbing event occurred near Annie's mother's home. A shed in the backyard caught fire. Police quickly tracked down the source of the fire and found a lighter engraved with the word Bramby, the name of the ship where Michael worked. This evidence made Michael the prime suspect in the arson case. However, police were unable to conclusively prove his involvement due to insufficient evidence. After the second fire, child welfare agencies in Maine assessed that Annie Tayan's sons were living in an unsafe environment. As a result, they made the difficult decision to remove Jimia and Sean from her custody and place them in the foster care system under the Department of Social Services. This decision devastated Annie as she desperately tried to regain custody of her sons. Despite her efforts, she was unsuccessful, leaving her heartbroken and separated from her sons. When Michael returned to Charleston, South Carolina, he settled into a rental apartment and rekindled his relationship with Annie. Despite their complicated past, Annie agreed to move in with him in Goose Creek, a suburb of Charleston. However, her time there changed when she discovered a photo of Michael wearing a wedding ring, indicating that he was married. When confronted about it, Michael confessed that he had been married once but had long since divorced. He explained that his ex-wife, Dawn Breeze, and their 3 children lived at his mother's house in Savannah, Georgia. Although Michael assured Annie that there was no ongoing relationship with Dawn, she felt uneasy about the information. Annie considered leaving him, but decided to stay, believing that he might be the right partner to start a family with. Unfortunately, their life together soon turned sour, as Michael's behavior toward Annie became increasingly hostile and demeaning. Annie, who was planning to return to her mother's home, discovered that she was pregnant. This news caused her to put her plans on hold because she was excited about having another child. In October 1989, just a month before she went missing, Annie gave birth to her 4th daughter, Jade. Although she understood that Jade could never replace her lost daughter, she felt that Jade had brought great joy to her life. Unfortunately, a month after Jade was born, Michael's treatment of Annie took a turn for the worse. He began to publicly insult and humiliate her. Annie shared her concerns with a friend, expressing her fear that Michael would relentlessly pursue her if she tried to leave. His controlling behavior became more intense. He isolated Annie in their apartment while he was at work by disconnecting his phone, keeping it in his bag, and carrying it with him. Annie became increasingly frightened by Michael's actions. Just 2 days before her disappearance, Annie called her close friend Katie French in a distressed state. During the call, Annie revealed her plans to leave Michael. However, Michael threatened her by saying that if she left, he would keep their daughter Jade with him, preventing Annie from seeing her daughter again. Annie was in a distressed state, crying and begging Katie to come to her and Jade's aid. Unfortunately, Katie was busy and unable to help her. Instead, she sent Annie money for a bus ticket, hoping that it would allow her to escape and return to Portland. This emotional conversation would be their last. 2 days later, on November 7, 1989, Katie attempted to contact Annie but received no response. A few days later, Michael contacted Katie to inform her that on November 6, Annie had packed up and left without saying where she was going. Katie expected Annie to contact her from her new home. But after 2 weeks of silence, she began to worry. By Thanksgiving on November 24, Annie had been out of contact for 20 days. Worried about her friend, Katie contacted all of Annie's friends, but no one had any information about her whereabouts. Katie attempted to report 24-year-old Annie missing to the police, but was told that, since she was not a blood relative, she could not file a formal report. As months passed without any sign of Annie, Katie finally got Michael's mother's phone number. When she called, she was shocked to learn that Annie's youngest daughter, Jade, was staying with Michael's mother. The news confirmed Katie's worst fears. She believed that Annie would never want to leave her daughter. Shortly after this disturbing news, Michael was transferred to the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Despite the situation of Annie, the mother of his child, he showed little concern for her whereabouts. Michael did not contact the police or begin searching for her. Months after Annie Tayan went missing, an official search began following a report from her mother. The investigation quickly focused on her partner, Michael Palin, who became the prime suspect. Michael claimed that on the morning of November 6, he woke up to find Annie had left while he was babysitting his daughter. He said that the night before, Annie had expressed a desire to end their relationship. He made no attempt to find her, believing that their relationship was over and that further contact was pointless. Michael also claimed that he was unaware that Annie had been reported missing or that she had lost contact with family and friends. When police searched the couple's rented apartment, they found no evidence, no clues, traces, or suspicious items that could help the investigation. Annie Tayan's case seemed to have stalled and no large-scale search was conducted for her. It is still unclear whether she is still alive, and any possible motive for her disappearance is unknown. The only confirmed detail is that the last person reported to have seen her was her partner, Michael. For 4 long years, there were no updates or discoveries about Annie. Her close friend Katie French was the only one actively searching for her, cooperating tirelessly with the investigation. Katie spent approximately $16,000 on phone bills alone and hired a private investigator as part of her relentless quest to find Annie Tayan. She contacted various organizations in the hopes of uncovering information about Michael's past. Katie was convinced that Michael was dangerous and untrustworthy. She feared him greatly, knowing that if he discovered her involvement with the police, it could put her in danger. In 1993, Annie's case took a major turn when it was transferred to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, marking a major turning point in the investigation. NCIS agents began a full review of the case from the beginning. They located Michael, who was stationed at Pearl Harbor Naval Station in Hawaii. When approached by Marine Corps police officers to discuss Annie's disappearance, Michael agreed to talk, but only in the presence of his attorney. He then completely stopped cooperating with the investigation and refused to provide further information. The Coast Guard gathered every available detail about Annie's disappearance and contacted South Carolina police. They asked for help in comparing their information with the records of the unidentified bodies, noting that Annie had given birth just a month before her disappearance. Then, South Carolina police reported a case involving a dead woman who had also given birth a month before her death. They sent a sketch of the woman, which shocked Coast Guard agents who saw it. They believed they might have found Annie Tayan. The discovery revealed a horrific murder. Annie's body was found near a highway in Jasper County, South Carolina, about 100 miles from where she lived with Michael. The crime scene photos were horrifying, showing a level of violence that agents said they had rarely witnessed. Annie's face was severely damaged and her skull was broken into 124 pieces, requiring nearly 500 hours of detailed reconstruction. It was also revealed that Annie's body had been placed in a navy blue bag that had been doused with gasoline and then set on fire. The burning bag was discovered at 6 a.m. on November 7, 1989, around the same time Katie French realized Annie had stopped answering her phone calls. Annie Tayan's dental records were used to positively identify her as the unidentified woman. After Annie's body was found, Michael became the prime suspect in the murder. Coast Guard agents developed a thorough investigation plan, starting with a review of his financial transactions. They discovered that on the day Annie went missing, Michael made a credit card purchase about 25 miles south of where her burned body was found. Additionally, his phone records showed that on the morning of November 6, he called his mother's home in Savannah twice, the first time at 4:35 a.m. and the second time at 5:17 a.m. Coast Guard agents believe that Michael killed Annie in their apartment and then moved her body to the side of the road, where he set it on fire. To advance the investigation, NCIS agents targeted Michael's ex-wife, Dawn Breeze. At the time of Annie's death, Dawn was still married to Michael and living at his mother's house in Savannah. After Annie's disappearance, Dawn divorced Michael and began moving frequently between states, as if she were trying to escape someone or something. The agents eventually discovered that she was living in Miami, Florida, in the summer of 1995, nearly 6 years after Annie's murder. They located Dawn, who had been engaging in spiritualistic activities for income. When the agents visited Dawn at her workplace to discuss Annie's disappearance, her response was surprisingly calm. She questioned the length of the conversation, expressing a desire to eat if the conversation was prolonged. This response surprised the agents, who had expected a more emotional response when Annie was mentioned. Dawn, however, remained calm throughout their conversation. During the 10-hour interrogation, Dawn's story initially matched Michael's. She said that when she visited Michael's apartment, he told her that his mistress had left him and that he planned to raise his daughter alone. However, there were discrepancies in the timeline of her visit. At one point, Dawn became quiet, looked down, and expressed a desire to tell the truth. Her subsequent speech was emotionless and tearless as she revealed what she had kept secret for 6 years. Dawn explained that one morning, Michael had called her urgently to his apartment in Charleston. There, she saw Annie's dead body on the living room floor. Michael then told Dawn to go into the bedroom to see his daughter. At the time, Dawn and Michael were still legally married and had 3 children together. Michael admitted to having an affair with Annie, which resulted in the birth of a daughter. He begged Dawn to accept the child and help him raise her. Dawn suggested that Michael, not wanting to fight for custody of Annie, had chosen murder as a simpler solution. On the night of November 5 to 6, 1989, Michael and Annie went to bed after having an intimate moment. Annie soon fell asleep, and during this time, Michael picked up a crowbar and began to violently attack her. Shockingly, their daughter Jade was sleeping next to Annie during the attack. Michael continued to hit Annie in the head more violently, and although she tried to fight back, she eventually died of her injuries in their bed. Michael then contacted his wife Dawn and asked her to come over immediately. He placed Annie's body in a duffel bag and placed it in the trunk of his car, along with a can of gasoline. He then put Dawn and Jade in the back seat of his car and drove about 100 miles. When he found a secluded spot along the side of the road, he took Annie's body out of the trunk, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. Once the fire was out, he quickly got back in the car and drove Dawn and Jade back to his mother's house in Savannah. Dawn's revelations marked a major turning point in the investigation, marking the first significant piece of evidence since the discovery of Annie's remains. Police asked Dawn to make a recorded phone call to her ex-husband, Michael, to discuss Annie's murder. Dawn agreed and contacted Michael, saying she needed to have a serious conversation because Annie's body had been found. Michael's response, "No, they didn't," confirmed to police that Dawn's account was credible. During the call, Dawn mentioned that blood had been discovered in their old apartment and that NCIS was investigating them as suspects in the murder. She urged Michael to come up with an explanation for the blood. Michael responded, "Okay, we need to work together and come up with something," which did not include any direct admission of guilt. However, his tone suggested that he understood the seriousness of the situation. He did not ask unnecessary questions or deny involvement, indicating that he knew what was being discussed. This conversation further supported the theory that Annie was murdered in Michael's apartment. At the end of the conversation, Michael warned Dawn to be careful with her phone calls and assured her that they would work together to resolve the situation. NCIS agents took Dawn to the crime scene to search for any remaining evidence. To protect her identity and ensure her safety as a cooperating witness, they disguised her before arriving at the apartment. Dawn carefully described and demonstrated the location of Annie's body and a sequence of events. She pointed out a spot near the wall and baseboard where a large amount of blood had seeped into the carpet and concrete floor below. Since Michael moved out, the landlord had replaced and cleaned the carpet several times, which is why there were no visible traces of blood. However, when the police used a special chemical on the concrete floor, a large purple stain appeared, indicating the presence of protein and matching Dawn's description of where Annie's body had been. Although the blood had soaked into the concrete, NCIS still had difficulty proving with certainty that the substance was blood. Therefore, the search for more physical evidence continued. Dawn mentioned a dresser next to the bed where Annie was killed, which contained a television covered in blood from the murder. Michael had said that the television needed a thorough cleaning because of the stains. He had then thrown it away, presumably selling it rather than throwing away a working device. Given his thrifty tendencies, finding the television was difficult. However, the agents were determined to find it. At this point, Michael realized that NCIS was watching him, especially after a phone call with his ex-wife, Dawn. Realizing this, he became very wary of their surveillance. NCIS agents were concerned that Michael might attempt to escape, threaten witnesses, or possibly harm someone. During a surveillance mission, Michael attempted to escape from the police, but was quickly apprehended by the police. As a result, on October 11, 1995, he was arrested, while he was being held in a military prison on suspicion of murder. NCIS agents interviewed all the residents of the apartment complex where the murders took place in November 1989. 3 months later, their efforts finally paid off when a neighbor revealed that he had purchased a television from Michael. Amazingly, the television was still working and in his home. The police quickly confiscated the television and sent it to the FBI lab for detailed forensic analysis. This examination led to a major breakthrough. They found 11 bloodstains on the speaker, which were later determined to match Annie's DNA, providing a key piece of evidence in the murder investigation. At this point in the case, Michael's attorney announced that he was willing to plead guilty, but only if the death penalty was dropped. Although the prosecutor was not happy with this development, military law required such deals to be considered at trial. Michael admitted his guilt without showing much emotion, recounting the details of his crime. His story showed no signs of remorse or sorrow. Michael Palin was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole after 30 years. Although Dawn knew about her husband's crimes and kept quiet for 6 years, she avoided legal consequences because her confession to NCIS was crucial in moving the investigation forward. Annie's children, including her son and daughter, now know what happened to their biological mother and understand that she did not abandon them. Jade, Annie's daughter with Michael, has grown into a beautiful woman. In a surprising turn of events, Michael Palin was released from prison in 2013 after serving only 17 years, supposedly for good behavior. His whereabouts are currently unknown and anyone who sees him is advised to exercise caution. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Mario Biondo. Mario Biondo was born in Italy, one of 3 sons of Santino d'Alessandria and Giuseppe Biondo. The family was known for its friendliness and generosity. From an early age, Mario was very creative and loved photography. He showed his talent and knowledge, eventually becoming a member of the technical support team in television. Throughout his life, Mario was active in volleyball, participating in many team competitions. This experience taught him valuable lessons about team spirit, trust, and accepting defeat. His good looks and charm attracted many admirers. Then Mario met Raquel Sanchez Silva, a talented young woman from Spain. After graduating from journalism in 1994, she aspired to become a television presenter. Raquel benefited from her mother Matilda's connections in the industry, but her intelligence and talent were already known to everyone. The couple met in Honduras in 2011, where Mario worked as a cameraman and Raquel was a presenter on the reality TV show Celebrity Island. Raquel quickly fell in love with him. According to her friends, she expressed her feelings openly, which was very unusual for her. Fortunately, Mario felt the same way and they started dating. Despite the age difference, everyone admired this smart and talented couple, and they became local celebrities, with the public closely following their lives. In June 2012, Mario and Raquel got married in Sicily. The wedding was a classic, beautiful event by Italian standards, celebrated with grandeur for several days. Locals believed that such a wedding would lead to a happy and long-lasting marriage. Unfortunately, this did not happen. Just a year later, on May 29, 2013, a tragic event occurred. Mario and Raquel had a small argument, a common problem for young couples, but they resolved it through reconciliation. At that time, the couple had been married for almost a year and were living in Raquel's apartment in central Madrid. Raquel needed to go to her hometown of Plasencia for work, so at around 8:30 p.m. that same evening, they said goodbye to each other in the garage before she left. The trip had been planned in advance and everything seemed to be going according to schedule. After Raquel left, Mario was alone at home. Mario made 3 phone calls. One was to his sister Emanuela, who lived in Sicily. He shared his ambitious plans for future television projects, which included preparing a new show and eventually traveling around the world with Raquel to create a travel blog. He also made 2 other calls, one of which may have been to a drug dealer. That evening, the Mario went to an ATM near his home at around 10 p.m., where he withdrew 110 euros. However, the money was never found in his home, suggesting that he had spent it all. About an hour later, a neighbor saw Mario at the entrance to his apartment building. She noticed that he was behaving unusually and ignoring her, which was out of character for him as he was usually very polite. He seemed upset, but there was no immediate cause for concern. Mario called his wife, and they talked until midnight, then continued their conversation via text messages. They mainly discussed their current situation, especially their difficulties conceiving. Raquel, 40, desperately wanted a baby but was unable to get pregnant, which worried both of them. Mario suspects that he may be infertile due to a disease he previously suffered from. Later, the Mario spoke with his brother Andrea about several exciting new projects he had planned for the future. Their conversations on social media and over the phone continued until 1 a.m., when Mario cleverly said goodnight to his wife and told her he was going to sleep. However, he had no intention of resting. Instead, he spent the next hour browsing various adult websites. He then used Google Maps to locate the nearest strip club to his home. He arrived at the club at 2:53 a.m. Once there, he paid for 3 drinks with his card but did not request any additional services. After spending some time at the club, he returned home. Once at home, he went back to adult websites. Around 6 a.m., he made his final entry on the computer, which contained a rough budget for a new television show he was preparing. After that, he checked his messenger again for any unread messages, but there were none. The next morning, Mario was unresponsive. Neither his family nor his wife could reach him. They assumed he was either resting or busy with the new projects he had mentioned, so no one thought to check on him. At around 3:30 p.m., Raquel, his wife, received a call from his workplace inquiring about his whereabouts. The producer was concerned because Mario hadn't shown up for filming. This was unusual for him, especially since it was the day of one of his favorite programs, Kitchen. Mario took his work seriously and would never let his team down or miss filming without a good reason. When Raquel realized she couldn't reach him by phone or through social media, she became worried and called their worker, Wilma. Raquel asked Wilma to check on him. Around 5 p.m., Wilma arrived at the apartment while on the phone with Raquel. When she opened the door, she was horrified by what she saw and screamed loudly. She quickly ran outside because she found a lifeless body inside. Wilma stopped a passing police car and reported her horrifying discovery. Other rescue teams arrived within 10 minutes. The officers found the body of a 31-year-old man, dressed in pajamas, with a scarf wrapped around his neck. The other end was tied to a shelf in the hallway. It appeared that Mario ended his own life. The police carried out a brief investigation and found that the doors and windows were intact, indicating there had been no forced entry by any outsiders. There were no clear signs of a struggle on the Mario's body, only a few bruises were present that did not appear to result from defensive actions. All this pointed towards the ended his own life. Raquel learned of the tragedy and quickly completed her duties before returning home. She informed the police that he sometimes engaged in strangulation during their sexual activities, suggesting that this could have led to the tragedy. This information interested the police, who considered this angle. Although there was no apparent reason to dismiss it, the investigation proceeded cautiously without jumping to conclusions. Raquel requested that the body be cremated as soon as possible, but her request was denied because the medical examiner needed more time to analyze the body and determine its condition. On June 1, 2013, Mario's family filed an appeal challenging the findings of the inquest. They believe that Mario cannot end his own life. He was determined and had ambitious plans for the future, which he was proud of. His life seemed to be going well, and they felt there was no reason for him to end it. Additionally, Mario's family opposed cremation and insisted on burial instead. The tragic event has attracted public attention as all those allegedly involved are well-known figures in Spain. Raquel shared a post on social media mourning her husband's death, describing him as a cheerful and ambitious person. However, she raised the possibility that his death could have been the result of his own life, or an accident. Raquel also alluded to potential issues with sex addiction and asked friends and supporters not to jump to conclusions and wait for the final investigation. A forensic expert concluded that Mario's death was likely an accident, noting that he had stopped using his phone around 6 a.m., which was the estimated time of death. Consequently, the case regarding Mario Biondo's death was closed, and no further investigations were planned. Mario was buried in his hometown in Italy on June 6, 2013, with his Raquel and family in attendance. In a noble gesture, Raquel chose to forego her husband's inheritance in favor of his family. Afterward, the Raquel began to withdraw from those around her. She moved to a different apartment and sold the one she had shared with her husband. Soon after, she voluntarily resigned from her television position. Those who interacted with her during this time noted that she appeared calm and composed, never showing signs of sadness or regret. Seemingly unaffected by recent events, she only briefly withdrew from the public eye. On June 27, 2013, she returned to television, quickly resuming her role as a presenter. She explained that returning to work had helped her try to forget and find comfort. Raquel, who quickly recovered, began a relationship with a new man, a businessman who had previously given an interview on Rakita. Mario's relatives were puzzled by her behavior, as it seemed that she had completely forgotten about her husband. Just a few weeks ago, she had been deeply in love with him, and her sudden change in mood raised many questions and suspicions. Mario's relatives were concerned about the circumstances surrounding his death, so they asked the police to conduct a further investigation. They specifically requested that his wife be questioned first. The police initially declined, stating that the case was closed. However, 7 months later, in December 2013, they agreed to reopen the investigation. Mario's body was exhumed, and the police reinterrogated all the witnesses. Additionally, the family hired 2 independent experts because they believed the initial forensic expert had erred in his findings. The new investigation used computer modeling to examine the details of Mario's death. Analysis showed that his posture was inconsistent with one's own life. He could not have been in that position to suffocate. The position of his legs did not match the marks on his neck or the type of knot used on his scarf, suggesting the scene had been staged. It was possible that someone else assisted him in staging it. Police began to consider the possibility that his death was a homicide. The case was reopened and the investigation continued. However, things took a different turn, made more complicated by the fact that so much time had passed since Mario's death that crucial evidence was lost. News spread quickly through the community and people began demanding answers about Mario's suspicious death. Back home, under pressure from the family, the local police also launched their own investigation, based on the results of an autopsy by independent forensic experts, and they began to suspect that this could be a homicide. Italian police traveled to Spain to conduct an autopsy and interview people close to Mario, including Raquel. They suspected she was hiding something due to her inconsistent statements. Police noticed several photos from the crime scene showing an ashtray full of cigarette butts and several empty beer cans, suggesting that the Mario had company that night. Surprisingly, no one checked for fingerprints or DNA on these items. Furthermore, no suicide note was found, adding to the mystery. Italian police also discovered that nearly 1,000 gigabytes of data had been deleted from the Mario's computer. Unfortunately, they were unable to recover this data. Mario's mother speculated that Raquel may have deleted the sensitive photos and videos that Raquel had discovered shortly before Mario's death. This further raises suspicions that the Raquel had other secrets that she feared would be revealed. Mario's family believes that Mario wasn't just visiting adult websites or strip clubs that night, he was looking for his wife there. They think he may have discovered something disturbing about her that could have motivated someone to harm him. It was discovered that the password on Mario's computer had been changed after his death and the files had been deleted shortly after, timing that coincided with the day of his funeral when Mario's entire family, including Raquel, were at the cemetery. This raises the question, who could have done this? It turns out that Raquel had a brother who was a computer expert. He left during the funeral and may have done this at her request. In May 2014, Raquel again attracted public attention when she was invited to appear on a show about her husband's death. However, she refused to participate and did not comment on the incident. However, she appeared before journalists in September 2014. She then accused her ex-mother-in-law of harassment. In response, Mario's family accused Raquel of involvement in his death. They believed she was responsible, but Raquel denied any wrongdoing and there was no evidence against her. Despite the accusations, Raquel continued her life. She married in September 2015 and gave birth to twins after undergoing hormone therapy to help her conceive. The father of her children is a businessman she met on television. Raquel no longer thinks about her ex-husband, while Mario's mother continues to search for evidence of Raquel's guilt. At one point, she even went to extremes. She released photos of the actual crime scene taken by the police. In these photos, Mario was in an unnatural position and showed no signs of life. Along with the photos, a forensic report from independent experts was included, stating that a person could not suddenly leave life in such a way. The photos showed clear contradictions with the initial police reports that were intended to quickly close the case after his death. Specifically, the reports mentioned that Mario's legs were bent, but in fact, his body was hanging with his legs straight. This move caused considerable public outrage, leading to increased police scrutiny, after which they initiated a more thorough investigation. In 2016, the intense media attention surrounding Raquel's trial led to a second autopsy conducted by a state medical examiner. This expert determined that Mario's death was a result of his own choice to end his life. Consequently, Raquel won the legal case, and the court ordered Mario's mother to pay her €3,000 for emotional damages. Following this, Mario's mother was placed under house arrest for 8 days. This incident fueled rumors and received extensive media coverage, culminating in a televised appeal that stressed the idea that Mario had chosen to end his life, reportedly due to his deep worries about infertility and his inability to have children with the woman he loved. As a result, the case was closed once again in Spain. The Italian police decided to close the case due to procedural constraints and the inability to conduct further investigations after so many years. They also criticized the Spanish police for the way they handled the investigation into Mario's death. However, the investigation did not end there. In 2017, a new expert, Spanish expert Luis Duca, was brought into the forensic department. After a thorough analysis of the circumstances surrounding Mario's death, he concluded that Mario could not have committed one's own life voluntarily. Luis Duca's opinion was highly valued because he had 15 years of experience investigating complex cases. The forensic expert stated that he thoroughly reviewed the dossier and all materials available to the police. His analysis was funded by Mario's family, and it confirmed their suspicions about the circumstances of Mario's death. Notably, there were no indicators of strangulation, such as small hemorrhages in the eyes. He believed that Mario could not have suffered a neck fracture from the height of his fall. Nor could he have died from suffocation since his heels touched the ground. For death by cerebral ischemia to occur, a tight noose would need to be placed around the neck. However, the scarf used did not adequately secure the back of the head and only partially surrounded it. The knot was so loose that Mario's head could easily have slipped out of the scarf. The pale blue color of the body suggests that Mario died lying down. There were no signs of convulsions at the time of death, as none of the items, including the figurine or picture frame, fell off the shelf, which would have occurred if there had been any violent movement. There was an unexplained fresh wound to the left of Mario's temple. The marks on Mario's neck did not match the scarf. He had clearly been strangled with another object, such as a rope or cable. The scratches on his neck could not be attributed to gravity alone. Additionally, the position in which the body was found raised significant questions. There were many more plausible ways for a person to die that would have been more comfortable. Why was he placed in this very awkward pose? According to police reports, the level of rigor mortis and the extremely low body temperature suggested that Mario died much earlier than 6 a.m., likely just after midnight. The theory of sexual activity was deemed unconvincing by experts, as Mario was fully clothed and there were no signs of any sexual manipulation involving his body. Experts used specialized software and obtained details about the metal shelf where Mario's body was found. Their analysis indicated that if he had died from hanging, he would have fallen to the floor. This led them to conclude that he must have been strangled in a different location, and the hanging was staged. Consequently, Mario's previously embalmed body was exhumed. During this examination, they discovered a significant hematoma in his brain, which suggested he had suffered a severe blow from a blunt object, information that had been missing from the original autopsy reports. It raised questions about how such crucial details could have been overlooked, giving the impression that they might have been intentionally concealed. Alongside the release of this data, Raquel revised her statement. Initially, she had said that her husband used strangulation as a sexual game since his youth, suggesting his death was either accidental or one's own life driven by personal issues. Now, she indicated that her husband might have been with someone he trusted while she was away, and that this person could have harmed him. She also speculated that her husband may have consumed alcohol or drugs, rendering him unable to defend himself. A new account emerged, stating that Mario allowed an acquaintance into their home, who then struck him forcefully on the head. This blow with a blunt object knocked him unconscious, after which a scarf was wrapped around his neck and used to strangle him. There were no signs of a struggle because he likely didn't have time to react. Following the attack, the assailant allegedly staged to end one's own life and calmly left the apartment. This explanation addressed why there were no indications of a break-in or any unknown people entering the home. In October 2018, writer Paolo Gentili released the book The Death of a Good Guy, the incredible story of Mario Biondo in Italy. He collaborated closely with Mario's mother, a key figure in this challenging case, as she seeks to defend her son's honor and discover the truth about his murder. The book portrays Raquel Sanchez Silva as manipulative and labels her a liar. On November 5, 2018, after a third autopsy was authorized by Italian authorities, the Anatomical Institute at the Palermo Polyclinic was tasked with conducting the examination. They performed X-rays and a CT scan, which included the participation of independent experts hired by Mario's family. In 2019, Mario's parents filed a complaint with the police investigator who was present at the scene of the crime. During the investigation in 2013, it was discovered that he had seriously violated his duties on several occasions. The police officer was convicted in May 2020, and both the doctor who performed the autopsy and his assistant also faced consequences. The investigation into Mario's death was reopened, revealing new information about the events surrounding the case. Many forensic science experts were brought in to investigate the case. However, a major problem arose because many of the documents used in the original investigation were no longer considered reliable, and some evidence was ignored when the investigation was suspended. One of the most significant violations in this case involved abuse of office. It was demonstrated that the prosecutor's office allowed modifications to PDF files containing evidence of social media interactions and visits to specific websites, which the police had originally reported. This evidence suggested that Mario did not visit any adult websites, nor did he contact a dealer to purchase drugs on the night of his death. All of this was intentionally fabricated. An investigation into Mario's internet connections that night revealed that 2 devices were connected to the apartment's Wi-Fi simultaneously, despite him being home alone. Furthermore, there was no evidence indicating that Mario had ever left the house. His supposed visits to the ATM and the strip club were based solely on the activation of his bank card in those locations, but it was not confirmed that he was the one using it. Mario, who used the cards, appeared to be the target of a malicious effort to damage his reputation. He was allegedly portrayed as a pervert and a substance abuser. However, if he was truly a pervert, why did he only pay for drinks at the strip club and not take advantage of the services offered? Unfortunately, recordings from the ATM and street surveillance cameras had been deleted over time, making it impossible to confirm who withdrew money from the ATM or who was present at the club. It was also puzzling why Mario, as a public figure often in the limelight, would choose to visit a questionable strip club and use his card there when he could have easily paid in cash to keep his visit discreet. A toxicology report on the Mario showed only a low level of alcohol in his system, with no other drugs present. A neighbor who saw Mario that evening began to doubt it was really him. The next day, it was revealed that Mario had been planning to ride his motorcycle and had checked the weather forecast. This raised the question, why would he do this if he was contemplating end one's own life? These inconsistencies prompted further inquiries. A witness was found, a waiter from the restaurant across from the house where the incident occurred. He reported that, from the very morning, all visitors spoke about something bad happening there and that police cars or an ambulance had arrived. However, how could outsiders know that the tragedy had occurred when the family's housekeeper discovered Mario's body after 4 p.m.? Despite new discoveries, several factors slowed down the investigation. First, most evidence had become outdated. Second, reconstructing the sequence of events was unreliable. Third, law enforcement officers initially involved made many errors and did not follow protocols, which required the case to be restarted. Due to the time lost, continuing the investigation became very challenging. In August 2022, the Spanish justice system decided to close the case because of insufficient evidence. However, the family of the Mario strongly opposed this decision, appealing to various authorities. Their persistence paid off, resulting in the case being reopened and classified as a murder in March 2023. The Mario family traveled to Spain again to gather more information about the circumstances surrounding Mario's death and to demonstrate their belief that Raquel was involved in the crime. They felt confident that no one else could have committed it. In the weeks leading up to Mario's deaths, the couple's relationship had significantly worsened due to issues related to pregnancy, and they were close to getting a divorce. The Raquel likely wanted to avoid sharing Mario's assets, particularly after he discovered a damaging secret about her and took money from her, which could also have motivated her to commit the crime. Notably, she insisted on the cremation rite after seeing Mario's body, which raised suspicions that she was trying to hide something. Only Raquel and the morning workers had keys to the apartment, but no one believed that an elderly worker could have killed Mario. The deceased's family was convinced he wouldn't have invited anyone over so late at night since he needed to wake up early. They believed Raquel, being clever, had meticulously planned everything. She arranged a trip to another city and attempted to tarnish her husband's reputation with false claims about his interest in adult websites and strip clubs. She also fabricated information that was included in the case file. The family of the Mario found her quick departure from their apartment suspicious, as if she were trying to hide something and dispose of the property to cover her tracks. Her rejection of Mario's inheritance, when it became known, was not a noble choice. It turned out that Mario had more debts than assets, which she would have had to pay if she had accepted the inheritance. Furthermore, accepting the inheritance would have required her to pay a significant tax, which she deemed too burdensome. Raquel's behavior at the funeral was also worrying. She arrived with assistants who took complete control of the situation, deciding when she should leave, how she should approach the grave, and how she should pose for photos. At one point, she asked to be left alone at the grave for a short time to pose for the cameras, a decision that left Mario's family confused. Some experts who spoke with Raquel believe she fits the profile of a typical integrated psychopath. This type of person has manipulative and narcissistic traits and can conceal their true identity. To avoid being revealed, they often rely on the idea that while people may see the facade they present, very few notice their true nature. Raquel, portraying herself as Mila, a beautiful woman, successfully hid her darker side, which was exposed by her husband. Unfortunately, he passed away shortly thereafter. The family of the deceased believes that Raquel skillfully used her intelligence and manipulative traits to carry out her plans. However, proving her involvement in the murder is quite complex, even though the circumstances seem clear. 10 years after the crime, Mario's family remains committed to uncovering the truth and seeking justice. Meanwhile, 50-year-old Raquel leads her life as if nothing ever occurred. She has established a new family and focused on her career, all the while denying any connection to the murder. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Susan Wright. Susan met Jeffrey Wright while working as a waiter at a restaurant in Galveston, Texas. They quickly fell in love and were married a year later. They soon had 2 children, and Susan's family seemed to be the ideal one. Jeffrey was a successful carpet salesman, while Susan managed the house and raised the children. They lived in a large house in Harris County, Texas. However, despite their outward success, things were not going well. Susan often had bruises on her body, indicating trouble behind closed doors. On a cold January evening, January 13, 2003, 26-year-old Susan stabbed her husband, Jeffrey, 93 times and buried his body in their backyard. The following day, Susan sought a restraining order against Jeffrey, claiming he had assaulted her the night before. 5 days later, she called her lawyer and confessed to killing her husband. The lawyer then contacted the police and informed them of the location of Jeffrey's body. When the police arrived, they discovered Jeffrey's body, which had been partially unearthed by a dog. He was found with his wrists bound and his robe tied around his ankles. Susan was later arrested. Susan pleaded not guilty, stating she acted in self-defense. She tearfully shared stories of the abuse she endured during her marriage, describing her husband as a sadistic substance abuser who seemed charming on the outside but controlled and belittled her. She lived in fear of his temper and was afraid to speak up when he was angry. He threatened to kill her and their children if she ever tried to leave. Susan recounted a specific incident when Jeffrey came home high from boxing classes and wanted to continue the training with their 4-year-old son, Bradley. He struck Bradley in the face, which made the child cry, and then he insulted him. Later, he turned violent towards Susan, forcing her to lie down in bed and then raped her. Afterward, he returned with a knife, and at that moment, Susan realized he was truly dangerous. Fearing for her life, she fought back by grabbing the knife and kicking him in the groin with her knee. Susan recounted that during the struggle, she managed to wrest the knife from her husband. She first stabbed him in the neck and then continued to stab him several times in the torso. At that time, her son, Bradley, knocked on the bedroom door and entered. Susan realized that she needed to get the child out of the bedroom. But she was afraid that Jeffrey would wake up and endanger her and her child. To prevent this, she tied her husband's right hand with a tie on the bed and hid the knife. She then brought Bradley back into the room. She expressed that she knew he was going to kill her and that she was very scared. Despite her fear, she stabbed him several times. After cutting the tie that bound him, she pulled her husband out of bed. His shoulder hit the nightstand, spilling wax from the candles he had lit earlier. She then brought a cart into the bedroom, placed him on it, tied his left hand to the cart, and tied his legs with a belt from his robe. She pushed the cart outside to the hole he had dug a few days ago and buried him. However, she insisted that she believed he was still alive. She spent the entire night on the couch, holding a knife, convinced that he would get up and pursue her. Susan was terrified to fall asleep, fearing she would be killed, but he never returned. She later shared that on the night of the murder, she suffered a mental breakdown that lasted several days. When asked why she didn't report it to the police right away, she said her mind was still struggling to comprehend the situation. It wasn't until Saturday morning, 5 days later, that she began to grasp the gravity of what had happened. The defense attorney highlighted multiple defensive wounds on Jeffrey's body, indicating that he was not initially restrained and had tried to fight back. Prosecutor Kelly Sigler alleged that Susan deceived her husband into getting into bed and tied him to the headboard, leading him to believe they were about to play a game. At that moment, she revealed a knife and turned the bedroom into a scene of torture. The prosecution stated that Susan's motive was to claim a $200,000 life insurance payout. They also pointed out that Susan had previously been a topless dancer at age 17, characterizing her as a promiscuous woman. During the trial, a bloody bed was brought into the courtroom. One prosecutor secured the bedposts while Kelly removed her high heels, sat on her colleague, and reenacted the knife stabs using the actual knife that Susan had used. This dramatic demonstration shocked everyone present. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected Susan's self-defense claim and convicted her of first-degree murder. As a result, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison. In November 2004, Susan filed an appeal. Her new attorney argued that she had not received a fair trial, claiming that the prosecutor's staging of the trial had influenced the jury's decision. The case was complicated by the fact that Susan's previous lawyers lacked experience and did not provide adequate representation. They failed to call witnesses who could support Jeffrey's claims of abuse and did not consult domestic violence experts. Crucially, they did not bring in the psychologist who had assessed Susan after the incident and determined that she was in a psychotic state, genuinely believing that Jeffrey was still alive. These points were compelling, leading to a new sentencing hearing in early 2009. A new trial began, and during the trial, the psychologist finally revealed what Susan had shared with him. She told him that she had woken up in a cold sweat, afraid that Jeffrey would try to come back. She had been convinced that he was right behind the fence. It took her a long time to realize that he would not come back. The psychologist noticed Susan's shy and submissive demeanor. She apologized for everything. This behavior is very common among women in abusive relationships. After the police investigated the case further, it was discovered that after turning 18, she had worked as a semi-nude dancer in a bar. However, after 2 months, she quit her job. After graduating from college, at the age of 20, she met Jeffrey, 29. He treated her well, gave her flowers and took her to fancy restaurants and clubs. Jeffrey expressed his love for her, and Susan found him sweet and handsome, with beautiful brown eyes. They married in October 1998, and a month later, their son Bradley was born. Since the birth of their son, he has changed a lot. He began to humiliate her for gaining weight during pregnancy and reacted angrily when she confided in him about her postpartum depression. Jeffrey even forbade her from taking the antidepressants prescribed by her doctor. He wanted her to become a housewife, staying at home all day. He only allowed her to go to the grocery store or visit her mother, limited to an hour and a half. One day, when she asked if she could attend some classes, he refused. When he found out she had gone to those classes, he became angry, verbally abused her, and physically assaulted her. Susan initially did not know that Jeffrey was using illegal drugs or that he had been convicted of possession in 1996 and was on probation. However, she began to suspect that he was using drugs, and her concerns were confirmed when she found drugs in their home. He then openly used drugs in front of her and became increasingly aggressive. Susan feared for the safety of her children and tried to protect them from his violent outbursts. She noted that the physical violence increased after they moved into their home in April 1999. His anger flared for a variety of reasons, such as financial problems, the electric bill, meals he did not like, or noise from the children. Susan described how he would often kick her in the chest, stomach, back, and legs. He also kicked their dog and sometimes threw it across the room. This may have caused the dog to harbor resentment toward Jeffrey, which may explain why it later dug up his body and bit off part of his hand in retaliation. Susan explained that at first she did not tell anyone about the abuse. She did not feel ashamed, but instead felt guilty, thinking, "It was my fault, and I was not good enough for him." To hide the signs of abuse, she rarely left the house. She never considered seeing a doctor to treat her injuries or reporting Jeffrey to the police, fearing that he would retaliate with more violence if she did. When a lawyer asked her why she did not leave him, she replied, "He threatened to kill her and her children if she tried to leave." However, she escaped in 1999 after another brutal beating. While Jeffrey was at work, she called her sister Cindy, who arrived with her husband and a trailer to help her move. They packed their belongings, along with Susan and her child, and went to her parents' house. The next morning, Jeffrey called Susan to her parents' house, threatening that a truck would be arriving soon and that she needed to load her belongings into the truck and return home, or he would kill her and her child. Fearing for their safety, she complied. Susan became pregnant again in December 2000, but unfortunately, she miscarried after Jeffrey kicked her in the stomach. She became pregnant a third time, and in December 2001, she gave birth to a daughter named Kaylee. Susan then suffered from postpartum depression, which made Jeffrey even angrier. He began dating other women through a website called Etna Omsk and eventually infected Susan with a sexually transmitted disease. In 2002, Jeffrey changed jobs and began to earn very little money. His behavior became increasingly erratic. He bought an air gun and told his wife that he needed it to maintain discipline in the family. On one occasion, he beat his wife with the gun and even hit her on the head with a brick. On New Year's Eve 2003, he ominously told Susan, "Happy New Year, this will be your last year." Susan's relatives, neighbors, and friends testified that Jeffrey physically abused her. They described him as violent and aggressive, often unable to control his anger. The defense highlighted that during the initial investigation, the police overlooked numerous holes in the walls of their home that Jeffrey caused by hitting Susan. There was also a broken bathroom door. Jeffrey had slammed it on her hand with such force that he broke her hand. It was established that Susan was unaware Jeffrey had taken out a $200,000 life insurance policy, which he kept secret from her. Additionally, Susan's mother reported seeing multiple bruises on her daughter and heard her scream in pain when she tried to hug her due to severe back pain. The prosecutor's witnesses included several friends and co-workers of Jeffrey, all of whom testified that he was a great person. One friend described Jeffrey's marriage to Susan as very happy and perfect. While the couple's friends acknowledged that Jeffrey had previously struggled with substance abuse, they insisted that those days were long behind him and that his marriage had positively changed his life. The prosecutor raised questions about how Susan managed to stop, tie him up, open the door, take Bradley, walk him down the hallway, return to the room, close the door, get another knife, and then go back to the bedroom to continue the attack. The prosecutor argued that Susan was aware of her actions and was attempting to conceal the crime. Kelly pointed out that the following day, Susan came to the police station to request a warrant against Jeffrey and later admitted she was trying to mislead the investigation. The prosecutor further noted that after the incident, Susan took the children to her sister's house and tried to scrub the bloodstains from the carpet and floor using bleach. She also dragged the blood-soaked mattress to the backyard to wash it. Susan claimed she only cleaned because she believed Jeffrey was still alive and feared he would reprimand her for the mess. However, the prosecutor questioned why, if she thought he was alive, she bought bags of dirt and covered him up. Susan answered that she felt she needed to hide him out of fear that he would wake up and be extremely angry. During the trial, Jeffrey's ex-girlfriend testified about her experiences with him. She explained that she moved in with Jeffrey, who was living with his parents at the time. At first, she found him charming, but he soon became abusive, particularly after drinking. She described instances where he would insult her, lift her by her hands, and even throw her down the stairs. After one violent incident, she injured herself on a piece of glass and reported it to the police, which led to Jeffrey's arrest. While he was in custody, he threatened her and pressured her to withdraw the police report, leaving her terrified of what he might do when he got out of prison. Ultimately, she fled to another city, but Jeffrey tracked her down. By then, she had started a new relationship with a man who could protect her. A social worker who specializes in domestic violence and a professor from Houston College of Law, known for their research on women who experience violence, both confirmed that Susan was a typical victim of domestic abuse. They explained that women in such situations often feel that the only way to escape is to eliminate their abuser. Despite the evidence and arguments of the defense, Susan was again convicted, but her sentence was reduced to 20 years in prison. She was recently released early after serving 16 years.